All right, we are recording. Hey everyone, welcome back. Good to see you. Back again with Jeremy Bentham, the floating head, the pirate, philosopher, all these other things, sculptor of wood, calloused hands, owner, I would hope. Otherwise, hypocrite could be added to that list. Although couldn't hypocrite be added to our lists anyway? Isn't that all of us? But we're back for another conversation nonetheless. He has since changed some of his background, which we're going to get into. Jeremy, for those who didn't watch our other conversation, which was 3 hours long, and so I don't blame them if they did. I need to start adding timestamps to videos, I realized. Why don't you give people a little bit of a primer on kind of who you are and what you're doing, in the context that makes sense whenever I say who you are and what you're doing. But yeah, just kind of give a brief introduction to folks. Are you there? You might be muted.
How about now?
All right, we are gravy train biscuit.
Yeah, the satellite link into my into my ship is sometimes I'm really hoping that Elon gets those internet satellites working. I don't have to worry.
I'm sure China will cover the globe in 4G towers full of spyware and anti-flat. So
I'll have to just move my ship into a giant microwave so that it's a proper Faraday cage.
That's right. That's
awesome.
Right.
All right. Fantastic. I am I am Jeremy Bentham. I'm the head. I am the living embodiment of the 18th century utilitarian English philosopher, political philosopher, tinker of such, polymath. And I assumed this identity in a world where identity is always negotiable these days.
It's true.
As very much like him, I am a entity not of my own time, and so I don't know. I do stuff. I what do they call it? I make and I drink things. Drinking
that's
could
the
be
Peter
coffee.
Dinklage thing. Yeah. I know stuff and I drink.
Yeah. So I've dabbled in a life of almost many things. I had a career in graphic design and marketing, and I went into databases and SQL and non-SQL and blockchain, and I just got really disaffected with the tech industry. I don't know, not quite a while ago, but probably 7 years ago or so, and I just, with the companies and whatnot I was working with, I came to the conclusion that all roads were leading to Amazon in the sense that companies were, you have a few dinners and a few drinks with the founders, and they finally start telling you that, their dream is just to sell whatever jig they're making to AWS.
Yep.
And I mean, that's fine. I'm not the founder of these companies. That also means I can get off the ship.
Yep.
Which I did.
So why don't you tell us?
There's a great book that I want to read. Well, there's a
Go
great
ahead.
book I want to read. It's called The Surveillance Capitalism.
Who's it by?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you, but I know that's the name of the book. And her insights, at least from what I've read summarily, really hit home, because that instinctually that's where I felt I was in that space. So anyway, I sort of walked away from the tech industry that I was in and got into animation and woodworking, and I needed to, as ironic as my manifestation is here, I needed to get back into the real world and do hands-on things as opposed to looking at command lines 10, 12, 14 hours a day.
Sure.
And the rest is a mystery shrouded in a riddle.
Fair enough.
I am drinking Sam Smith's Welcome Back Ale.
Sam Smith, the they them Sam Smith.
No, Samuel Smith, as in the English
They,
brewery.
yeah, the one
Yeah.
that they make. They make cider, right? Ciders.
I believe they also make cider, not Strongbow.
Yeah.
Don't.
No,
Yeah.
Strongbow sucks and doesn't count. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your ship that you're on now? So is that what's that bottle is there? Is that what you're drinking?
That's the Samuel. Yes, that is the Samuel Smith's Welcome Back Ale. It's their holiday ale.
Okay.
I'm still waiting for Sam Smith to take up my long time email pitch that they should have a Shakespeare. Alas, they still do not, but they have Shakespeare on some of their ales. Alas.
Okay.
A
Shakespeare. Although you shouldn't shake
yeah.
your beer. So maybe that's what they're thinking.
Possibly.
Sure.
I feel like it's a Darwinian mechanism. If you were to ignore the giant visage of William Shakespeare on the bottle and shake up your beer before opening it, the instructions are self-explanatory. Like, you deserve to wear your beer and not drink it.
Fair enough. If you're that dumb. So in terms of the rest of what you have there, you know, let's talk about your books a little bit, because last time you had, I believe the one that I remembered most was you had the book that was the kind of the how-to manual a little bit for the Spanish Inquisition. It's
the Malleus Maleficarum.
Yeah, so I was about to say it's a Latin term that I am not going to pronounce well. But now you have Ship of Fools, and it said since something, and also science.
Science since Babylon, yes.
Yeah, science since Babylon. So before I hit record, you were telling me a little bit about Ship of Fools, and I totally did not make any mistakes whenever I identified it as also the name of Ted Kaczynski's manifesto he wrote, the Unabomber. And you said that he was paying homage to something else that was a book written many generations prior to that. And I said, well, that sounds like something that we should hit record for. So, acts of domestic terrorism aside, what is the original Ship of Fools?
Well, I would be hard pressed to not be curious to think that there is a Ship of Fools even prior to the one that I'm referencing, but I have yet to be able to find it. The one I am referring to is a work by a German of the name of Sebastian Brandt, who I believe it was published in the 1490s. And it was there's a lot of interesting things about it. One of the people he commissioned to do the etchings for it was Elbrick Durr, who was a very famous Renaissance artist, known for his sort of blending of occult mysteries and what was standard for 300 years in terms of Christian iconography and art. And he's one of the people that is usually signaled to when it comes to a breaking between traditional Christian art and secular art. Okay. So Brandt had him commissioned, and it's an illustrated storybook, if you will. It's a fictitious book based on Brandt's observations as a person in Germany, using the analogy of a ship and monitoring the behavior of the town square, if you will, and seeing how preoccupied they made themselves with petty gossip and the worst habits that always seem to carry with us in social circles of peer pressure, preference falsification, just the idea of surrounding yourself with a circle of people that I'm trying to think of the Kierkegaard term, but they have the lowest expectations for your best interests.
Kind of a water sinks to a stone level kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think Kaczynski doesn't make a direct reference to the Ship of Fools, but if you read both of them, it's quite clear that there's, as artists steal in the sense, there's some sort of influence there. Just Kaczynski takes the town square also puts it on a ship.
He makes it the government. I think he made it like the nation.
Yeah, and just the idea that people, they're a force not in the trees and they're not paying attention to what's in front of them.
Yep.
So yeah, I think Kaczynski focuses more on the consequences of the distractions, whereas Brandt is just it's a very sardonic piece, and it's the language even translated into modern English is a very playful language. It's not like a stern sort of apocalyptic.
I'm also a guy sending bombs to people kind of language.
Yeah, right. Yeah. There's no evidence that Brandt did any of that such thing.
Good.
Unfortunately, we also don't have any poetry or anything by Guy Fawkes, so it's hard to try to make an analysis of these sorts of things without multiple.
Well, the Wachowskis still lionized him in V for Vendetta, so maybe we don't need it.
There it is. Yep. Yeah.
So, what about Science Since Babylon? What's that book?
Science Since Babylon is a book that I came across, at least knowingly. Like, there's tons of things that I've read that over the years I forgot titles to and whatnot.
Sure.
But then something reminds you of it. I imagine it's like that in any art form. Predominantly with us, it's films, right, as a culture. Science Since Babylon, I discovered through Eric Weinstein. He makes a reference to it in one of his early podcasts about, it's like, if not this, try that, sort of. And in regards to STEM education in America and just the science community, it was a book he read growing up about the sort of long arc of history in terms of scientific innovation. And he focuses mostly on physical sciences, like from an engineering perspective, not an abstraction perspective. So he starts talking about the anti-Kythera mechanism, which was a part of a elaborate sort of astrological gear assembly that was uncovered off the shores of Kythera in Greece. That's over 2,000 years old. That shows a fully fleshed out gear assembly, which we didn't arrive until maybe China or the medieval Egypt or the Middle East or something like that. And so he makes the point of saying, like, this type of engineering it's not emergent. Like, it's a long iterative process. And so with the discovery of something like that, then it leads to a series of questions about just exactly what we don't know about the sort of adaptive history of people in general.
Yep.
When it comes to problem solving and emergent knowledge for the sake of survival and for the sake of like need knowledge on a need to know basis. And that's really the theme of the book, and it sprawls like civilization, if you will, but it does it in a very as far as books are concerned, it goes about it in a very swift manner. So he just emphasizes on a few objects or relics of engineering throughout history, and then the summation of it leads to, at the time he wrote it in the 60s, or at least published in the 60s, science is on this exponential swing, this exponential delta, and that the amount of scientific papers to be read, in 1950 compared to 1850 is impossible for any one person to get through in a lifetime. And it's just, that decimal point is just going to keep moving as time goes on. Funnily enough, his assessment, Derek de Sola Price is the name of the author. His assessment of that never could have, because he passed away, I don't know, 30 years ago. Maybe what Eric speaks about, not necessarily just about the djinn, but where science has gone in terms of it's once again returned to a political state where it's
Yep.
analysis of things are adapting to, and it's hard to say. It's probably always been this way in a large extent, where science's research can be pursued relative to who's paying you to pursue it.
Yep. What made
Right.
me think whenever you were saying it's probably always been this way, I had the thought that it is reactive to like markets and incentives and disincentives. And I thought about how even early explorers needed to get, the funding from people. And it was, what are you going to bring us back? I mean, that's, the Christopher Columbus, there's gold.
Yeah, that's all of them. That's Da
Yeah.
Gama, that's
Magellan.
Sir
Yeah.
Walter Raleigh. That's
Yeah.
everybody.
And so like all of them need, like, were beholden to their investors and their, the stakeholders, in terms of, none of it was, as far as we can tell, just pure like grant money kind of thing. And not that grant money doesn't have strings attached, but it wasn't just, here's, some bags of gold, go nuts, because we just believe in it, as we need to get something on the other side of it.
Yeah, there's definitely a Damocles sword.
Yeah.
Over the head, and there's always. I mean, there's very few, at least documented, exceptions to these rules. Usually, the theme though is these people keep their research really close to the chest for long periods of time, and they're able to not need to pursue it scaled beyond, their needs of the day. So like Newton is a very good one. Like he was able to do his things isolated in his house or in his dorm or his quarters at Cambridge. Whereas, but he was an example where not until late in life did he ever get entrenched into the powers that be. So he was the head of the Royal Mint for 30 years, but that didn't start until his establishment of calculus and optics, and he was already like, he had no sword in that regard over his head.
Yep.
Because nobody knew about it outside of a few of his colleagues at the Royal Society, and most of them thought he was crazy. So,
which is probably a good place to be, because it means people will probably leave you alone.
Yeah, I think it's actually a good cover.
Well,
just come off as slightly nuts.
Yeah.
And
there's that old.
As long as you can feed and clothe yourself.
Yeah, reasonably well. There's that old Jack Handy Deep Thoughts. There's got to be a stage between when a scientist is on the process of going mad, when they're only a little bit mad, and that's probably when they throw the best parties. But anyway, whenever you're talking about the technologies and the things in the past that, we assume that, at least naively, I think we would assume that, our ancient forebears didn't have access or didn't figure certain things out. Whenever I was in Israel, underneath the Temple Mount, there's this huge stone, and one of the guys I spoke to, who did tours there, said that they had done research, and that stone was somewhere, I want to say 4 or 5x what they could move with modern machinery without breaking. And they had no idea how it got there. They said the closest we think it might have come from is hundreds of miles that way, and we couldn't move this stone today without breaking it. So we don't know anything about that. And then on the western side, whenever we encountered like the aqueducts, which of course that's Rome, that was put there by whenever the Romans occupied it, and they were going into the science of the aqueducts and how they had it measured where, it's just the slightest angle for hundreds and hundreds of miles to bring this water from one place to another and then carry it onward. It's like, yeah, no, they knew a lot of things that, you wouldn't think they would have. I mean, there was a place we went to in Italy it was basically a modern toilet. I mean, they had all these toilet seats basically, and there was water that flowed in front of you and water that flowed underneath the seat. And the water in front of you, you would have like a stick, and they would take like a sea sponge and stick it on there and you clean yourself. But either way, there's water flowing. They had like two different troughs of fresh water circulating through these bathhouses. And then there were these other places that they had heated swimming pools, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, where they'd have these big columns and the pool would be above that. So they build the pool and the floor was hollow, and they'd have a bunch of these columns holding it up. And underneath there, they would have a kiln, and there was a person with a bellow that would bellow this hot air underneath there. It would heat the floor and it would heat the swimming pool. So they would have heated pools and heated floors year round. And, again, this is 4,000, plus years ago. And it's like, yeah, no, it's not like all technology, and, just because, we think about, old timey kinds of things of like people putting leeches and bloodletting and all these other things, and it's like, no, that just because they didn't have all of the things that we have doesn't mean that they didn't figure stuff out. They were actually a lot smarter than we were, probably in a lot of ways, when it comes to those kinds of technology.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I consider again and again when it comes to differences, and one of them is, and that's the Kierkegaard part that I was trying to remember, is that the idea that civilization was an invention to distract man from not thinking about death. And they, that's the memento mori part of we live in times where we don't think of, in spite of the whole COVID thing, we don't take death seriously.
Yeah.
Right. You get one shot at this, as far as we know. It's over. And and until you have direct experience with it in some way, you're still wearing a different pair of glasses than those that have, and it's a significant set of glasses, I would say.
Yeah.
And it was, there's a lot of famous, I think there's even an art movement in the 1600s about memento mori. It's by a few artists. Of course, probably started by one and then copied by a few, but
Sure.
The art stays nonetheless. Of they're arranged pieces usually on a table, and it's everything from very luxurious baubles and silver platter, plateware, and goblets, and very nice calfskin books and all this stuff. And then there would always be a skull. So it'd just be the reminder of in spite of everything on this table, death comes for us all.
Yeah.
It's always there. And the art of it is like, take that for what you will. Like, there's no instructions beyond just exposing you to this reality.
Mm-hmm.
And, the art hat that I wear thinks about this a lot, is that there's very little art, beautiful or ugly, if you will, that reminds us of this ancient heritage we all share of death.
Yeah.
And I think that, like everything else, that'll return. Probably from some sort of horrific social cascade.
Well, it's the Albert Einstein quote, I know not the weapons that will be used in the Third World War, but the one after it will be fought with sticks and stones, kind of thing.
Yeah, correct.
So
I think, I don't know, the Brandt book sort of going back to that, alludes to this a bit of like, there's, but he speaks about it in terms of classes, but not in classes in the modern sense, classes of like cobblers and cooks and bakers, the butcher, baker, candlestick maker sort of thing.
Yeah.
Basically classes of tradesmen, and then uh in spite of like their gifts, they get wrapped up in like the wrong, like little tedious things, and they sort of forget this bigger process uh, of just time, right? And obviously, that's the other thing, is time was much more um, was much different for them in so many ways, right? They much fewer people escaped birth. Many more people, the expectation of life was much less. Quality of life was much less. So I think there's a hastening of we need to move very quickly here, because this whole project is going to be over.
Yeah.
And just the additional social destabilization, like all the time, even in sort of the first worlds of that, because it's just like you don't know what a monarch is going to do from one day to the next.
Yeah.
What they're going to swing, like politically or legally, and there's a lot of parallels to now with many of these patterns, and
The
but they're not
rhyming
all.
nature of history.
Yeah, the rhyming nature, and I also think there's a meta. Um, there's like a timestamp. Like anytime you create a piece of digital art in Adobe, they allow you to add like all this metadata, date, time, notes, a timestamp, all this stuff. And I think there's like commentary that goes along with a lot of these patterns in throughout history. Like one I was thinking about the other day is that life is this, like, human existence is this continuous arc, and it's one giant witch trial. The accusers are different, the accused are different, the gavel is different, the judge is different, but the court remains.
So I want to unpack that a little bit, because kind of up until this point, we've basically spent about 30 minutes just shooting the shit, which is fine. But you sent me this really kind of interesting piece of prose the other day, and in terms of kind of the stuff you were thinking about, and I took some notes on it. But there was, to what you just said, there was kind of a theme that I've gotten in what it seems like some of the things that are, I always call it, if I have something stuck in my craw where there's something I just can't get over, like there's a thought my brain keeps like naturally going back to. And there seems to be something about, whether it's what you sent me the other day or even just some things before that, where it seems like there's a bit of a visceral, I don't want to say like rage, but like urgency. Whenever something somber motivation to some of the things that I've seen you say and allude to. And so I was wondering, and then just where you just said, like, all, no one says all of history is basically a witch trial, if they're not thinking in those kinds of terms. And I'm not saying you're wrong even, but just if you had to kind of break down a little bit with where you're at, what leads you to that, and just kind of what it is that you're thinking about kicking around right now. And maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe everything's lackadaisical on your end. I don't think that's correct, but it seems like there are certainly people right now can be broken down into different groups, as is the case at any point in history. But right now, I think one of those groups are people that have a fire under their ass a little bit. And you strike me as right now kind of being one of those folks. And so, if you could kind of go into a little bit of that, of kind of how you're thinking, how you're feeling, what's informing some of that, or correct me if I'm wrong also, but informing some of that, to where it's, that whether it's the witch trial thing or, the Puritans versus pirates kind of thing. Just what's going on your end? Like, how are you doing, I guess, is the most reductive way to ask what I just basically said. But does that make sense? Do you kind of get a general sense for what I'm talking about here?
Yeah, absolutely. What's going on my end? It's I physically, I live in Minnesota, and the atmosphere is, I don't know what the atmosphere is. I'm more interested in the result. The results are empty streets, gunfire, explosions, houses, commercial buildings burning down. So, I have the Citizen app, right? And the Citizen app is essentially sort of a social media plus Google Maps hybrid that alerts you to negative. It's not alerting you to a picnic in a park. It's alerting you to a robbery, armed assault, someone's house being burned down. Yesterday, someone just somehow took their car, drove through an embankment and into a business, like right off our light rail.
Sweet.
And it hit a gas line, so they had to come and shut all that off. Someone got gunned down, attempted, murder by knife. And I'm getting pings I'm getting these a dozen a day, like within a mile to 2 miles of my residence, and the sirens never stop, day or night. It's always on. And yet, interestingly enough, the Citizen app is more, it's more interested in telling me that thousands upon thousands of people, new cases of COVID. New cases of COVID. I'm like, here's the bottom line. I'm not interested in COVID. I'm interested in if I'm going to wake up with a, intruder in my house. I've had my house broken into in the last 6 weeks. There's nothing in my
While you were there?
I was not home, but it was during daytime.
Wow.
And there's nothing in our approximate zone in my neighborhood, or I live in St. Paul, which is adjacent to Minneapolis, separated by the Mississippi River.
Yeah.
But there's nothing safe about my living environment, right? Anywhere. Like the city, it's decided to bleed out, really. Like, whether that be through violence it doesn't want to manage, or apathy it doesn't want to manage. It's like a blending of the two, because one is feeding the other, right?
Well, and really, government can only manage and should only try to manage one of those things.
That's it. And what we're learning is, pulling out a little bit and going to what I'm experiencing is probably what many people in urban cities are experiencing right now.
The Hivemind, yeah.
Is government's is not going to save you.
Yeah.
Amazon's not going to save you, even though it might bring you a couple pack. Like, no one's here to save you. Like, that's not going to like. So there's this paralysis of, let's just wait it out, and things will be fine. And I think we haven't had that experience, really in 50 years.
Yeah.
Right. Not since we trained kids to hide under desks in the event of a nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of like local business magazines that I trades, if you will, that I watch, and it's literally just an obituary for businesses now. This brewery is going under. These restaurants are closing, never to come back. this small trucking company is going under because all the businesses they serviced were restaurants that are now gone.
Yeah.
This business is leaving because it can't handle the violence, and the insurer won't cover the millions of dollars of damage that was done to their business, and they're not a Fortune 500 company. So they're leaving, and but there's plenty of Amazon jobs right now, right? Plenty of, like they've moved in. They have like 6 or 7 warehouses in the area now, where 2 years ago there was only one. And it's just, in spite of like being seemingly ground zero for much of what the world decided to respond to, there are no more answers here than there were, 6 months prior to those events. Like there's just more problems. It's like, I think Naval, or adjacent to Naval, made the point of we're now living in an era where temporary solutions to temporary problems have become a permanent problem.
Yep.
Or something close to that nature.
Or the solutions become problems themselves.
Yeah, it's the Hegelian theorem, like played through, and there's just this is what society looks like when it's running on it's non-interoperable beliefs. Like yard signs are full of wear a mask, but I want to be able to call the police on you if you're walking outside wearing a mask.
Yep.
Oh, also defund the police. Like, I think the defund the police slogan is great. Let's start with defunding all the police on social media and on the internet. Like anyone that has the ability to try to control or cancel your life through the internet should not have the ability to do that. Let's start there and then work our way into the problems. And this is coming from a place where we've had multiple issues over the last few years with cops just shooting people before they like settle, like before people even get out of the car. Like, it's just the sign of how, oh, by the way, also the yard sign of Biden Harris. So it's like, you're defund the police. Let's make the top cop a vice president.
Yep.
Oh, and the guy who helped push the crime bill of 94. Like none of this works, right? So local level,
incompatible. They're
right?
incompatible.
Yeah, right. Local level, national level, and so the attitude is just this just like, we're just going to wait it out and things will get better. It's like, how, right?
Well, do you think? I mean, part of that is they don't. There's a lot there, and I have to rein in the different ways that I could take any of that,
right,
or trajectories. But a lot of that is, I think, what do you impotent, where people they literally don't know any other option, right, other than wait it out, because they've, maybe we've talked about this before, but the concept of ever having a point in your life, I have these different like ideas that are kind of like, I haven't put a fine point on, and one of them is that our civilization has advanced too fast for our internal desire or drive to prove ourselves to catch up to. And what I mean is that there was a point in time where we had all these rites of passage, right? I promise this is related to what you're talking about. But we had these rites of passage, and you needed that because you needed to know that the members of your tribe were reliable, that they could be there. They were going to help your family, help your tribe, whatever. And it became ingrained in us. And, even as early, I think, as probably World War II, and then the kids who grew up hearing all the stories of heroism from, their grandma and grandpa and great grandpa or whatever, or not great grandpa, from their dad in World War II, went to do Vietnam. And, we get a little bit of that with some of the stuff in South America, Desert Storm. My point is that generally most people don't have a rite of passage or a way to prove themselves. Like society is just caught up to us in that regard, like where it's like, and it's not just that, it's not just being able to prove yourself, but knowing how to wield your liberty, like knowing how to use it, like understanding the necessity of it. I was listening to Dave Rubin interviewed that North Korean refugee. I think her name is like Yaomin Park or something. She's only 27.
Okay.
But she talked about how whenever she finally, her story is incredible. If you haven't, she has a memoir too. But if you haven't checked at least the interview out, I would recommend that. But she talked about how whenever she went through all this stuff. So I'm fast forwarding through a lot here. But when she finally made it to South Korea, like she went to China, then to Mongolia, and then to South Korea. She said that whenever she was there and people were asking her, like, what do you think? And asking her opinion on stuff, she said that the freedom was stifling. Like it was so terrifying to be accountable for your own decisions. She said at one point that if she knew for sure her safety would be guaranteed, that she was tempted to go back to North Korea because that way she wouldn't have to make any decisions, because freedom was that paralyzing for her and that intimidating. Right. And so I think that there is something to be gleaned in terms of mapping a little bit of that onto this. And I think we've talked about this where, their kids grow up and their parents, these helicopter parents or bulldozer parents, I think they call them now, do all this stuff for them, make all like their decisions, or control everything. And then they control, go to this school and do this thing and get this degree, and they pay for it. And so that, or at least they pay for part of it, or maybe they bought their car in high school. And so they hold something over their head, control their lives. And then the kid goes and gets an apartment somewhere where the landlord takes care of all of the things, and they don't ever have to take care of anything on their own. And so then it's just like, they might have some degree of freedom, but there's blinders on the freedom. Like an animal wearing blinders can go a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, or at least it seems like it. But they're like, blinders aren't the same as, having something completely over your eyes. Like you can still see something, but it's not the same as freedom. And so like the people who think, well, maybe we'll just wait it out, to what you're talking about, I think are part of that generation that just doesn't know any different. Then it's like, well, what else would we do? Well, there's about a dozen things you could think about doing off the top of your head if you're someone who's ever had to make a decision for yourself, or whoever, understood like how to wield your liberty, understood personal responsibility, all these other things. But if you kind of grew up in that bubble, then I could absolutely see why they would take what would, by outsiders, like I hear what you just described and I'm like, that's moronic. I know that those are people who probably even have families. And I'm like, the idea that someone who's responsible for children or for their families that would have such a naive and stupid perspective is astounding to me, right? But that's the difference between the people who live in those hive mind cities, and the people who don't. Like it's night and day. It is completely different. And so I can see why they would do that, because I don't know what else they would do. And those who do know what else they would do aren't in that situation anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, of note, I wasn't, I was not born in a city. I was
right.
Raised in a agricultural community that was small. And so even though, I'm not born of farmers, I'm born near farmers.
Yep.
So that's at least enough to, like, all those senses. And I've worked on farms, but so adjacent to like people I grew up with who did, there's an order of magnitude, but like we collectively didn't understand the quote unquote city folk to an extent. And then to another extent, I was like, I need to get out of here as fast as possible. But there was a lot of reasons for that, not just because it was like a farming community. That was not really a part of it. And the difference is, I think, in part, the idea of moving to a city is that there's this, I think there's an expectation, whether it's on the front of the mind or not, about I get to give up some of that choice, maybe, of like, I can just insert myself into a city and have these social norms like taken care of for me.
Yep.
Right. I can get into a group and I can quickly not have to disagree with anybody.
Yeah.
Or very few. Like, and the selective pressures of filtering those people out, I think, are much greater, because the differences of perceived survivability are different.
Yeah. Well, one part of that I didn't close and explain that has to do with what you just said there is, whenever I said there's a lot of things that have caught up to us faster than we've learned how to adapt out of our just kind of innate, like how we are as people. And that's that rite of passage thing and proving yourself.
Yeah.
Is I think that drive and desire still exists. And the way people are trying to do that, I think, is some of that where it's like, well, I don't have to disagree with people, but I can join this tribe in the city. And then we can prove like that we're the good guys, or prove, that we're part of the thing that matters, or put the signs in the art or whatever. And then I think for some people, who think that this is 1840 or something, or 1619 or whatever, then they are trying. I think they're trying to scratch an itch that they can't scratch in their current environment, but the itch is still there in terms of proving that they're, if you're a dude. I think a lot of dudes, even though very few of them actually take it seriously, have a desire to say, I'm a man, to prove I'm a man, but they don't want to actually go through with what that would look like to do that and be a responsible, male adult. And so instead they try to map that thing, scratch that itch with all these other things like social media posts, or just joining a group that all has the right opinions. And so that they can feel like they're standing up for something and fighting the battles of old, even though they're not. And it's totally, it's fantasy, it's this masturbatory, image they're trying to create of fighting fascist or whatever, even though it's not true.
Yeah. I think in part of that, with the rites of passage thing, I think a lot about when I listen to larger people with larger audiences on social media platforms run through this type of ELISA program, which is determining, the weights and biases. Like, it's a computer programming reference, but essentially determining like the top patterns that they always can detect from any sort of output. So it's like, it doesn't matter what topic they put out for the day or for the hour, they can guess with pretty good certainty that their top 3 responses are gonna be X, Y, and Z, right?
Yep.
But I guess what I find interesting is that there's this erroneous association to who those people might be. And what I mean by that is, especially now with COVID, or not COVID, with lockdown, in many places, you have millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of kids that have nothing to do.
Yep.
But they have Twitter. they have Twitter accounts,
And Fortnite,
of course,
and TikTok.
Well, and of course, there's the bots and this stuff. It's like, I mean, that's a lot of people with idle time that are being poorly raised under terrible circumstances, that their rite of passage now is, like you said, I think for men, it's just put into the DNA. Like, rites of passage are hierarchy, a combination of hierarchy, competence, violence, maybe something else, but those are the top 3 that come to mind. And now we're seeing hierarchy, competence, and violence manifesting online because there's nowhere else to do it.
Yep.
Right. So the violence of how you speak to somebody online,
yep.
the the warped sense of I'm really good at treating people like garbage online. You know, I'm a great troll. I'm a very sophisticated troll. This blah blah blah, and then this sense or expectation of hierarchy. Like I'm going to work my way up the troll ladder or the griefer ladder or whatever it is, and be the best at it. Even if there's not a real thing like that, like Reddit is designed to do this.
Yep.
Twitter, in some sense, is designed to do this
Twitter
from
absolutely is. Yeah.
from an like I don't care about the philosophy. Implicitly, this is how it's being used.
Yep.
Um,
We
uh,
lost something when people like, there's that scene in Office Space where the main character Peter asks his neighbor Lawrence, at your work, does anyone ever say, sounds like someone has a case of the Mondays? And he's like, hell no, man, someone get their ass beat saying something like that. And like, we lost something where when people stopped when you were talking about people being able to be good at violence and trolling or whatever and treating people awful, there was a benefit for people and for society whenever you would just get your ass handed to you if you spoke to people a certain way. And obviously, just like with anything else, there are pathological versions of that, that aren't good. But on a root level, the idea of losing consequences, was is really damaging. I remember, fortunately, I kind of grew up in the era that was a little bit of that, but also not really. Like, we faced consequences for stuff, and I learned. There is that scene in this old Chappelle Show skit when Charlie Murphy is telling the story about the true Hollywood stories, and that Rick James came over to Eddie's house and was grinding his muddy boots on uh, Eddie's couch, and Charlie and Eddie just wail into him and are beating up his legs. And then they call the car to come and get him, and Eddie said, we should get Rick some help. And Charlie says, what do you mean? We just did. You think he's going to go into someone else's house disrespecting like that again? Wrong. And so, like, there used to be consequences for that kind of behavior. And I worry that we're really, I'm not saying that there needs to be roving patrols of people. There's the end of that Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back movie where they use all of the money, the royalties they got from the movie about themselves, to go to find everyone that posted on message boards about them and just beat the crap out of them. That's the whole end credit scene, is them showing up to people's houses that posted about them on the internet and just beating them up. But I'm not saying advocating for something like that, but I worry how damaging it is for people to grow up in a milieu where they aren't learning facial cues, they're not learning body language, and just losing that interpersonal give and take and the bumps and bruises that come along with it, some metaphorical, some not. But learning what you can and can't say to people and how you should and shouldn't treat people. What you're describing there is not just ubiquitous, but I think we're already seeing some of that manifest, because those same people are like, the thing that I'm mapping onto right now is that, Dave and others have said Twitter is not real life. And my point is that Twitter is becoming real life, is that our reality, our physical reality, is conforming to Twitter, not the other way around. Twitter is not some, place out in the ether that has to conform to the real world. In fact, it's gotten so strong, and the social media echo chambers have gotten so strong that it's terraforming reality. The cyberspace is terraforming the real world. And some of that is what we're seeing in the streets right now, is people who are reflecting their Twitter, but in the real world.
Yeah. I would. Yeah, I like these more sort of forensic methods of digging into these things. And so, piggybacking on what you just said, uh, of course, people have always been violent. That should be self-evident. But when I observe some of these interactions with people, now the rage and the anger, manifest almost immediately. And I almost wonder if, if we could go inside of the heads of some of these people, and it's like, is this rage? Is this like physical confrontation and these sorts of things? Are they coming about simply because a person has to deal with another person and they can't just turn off the web browser or, unlike them, or, they can't just make them immediately disappear. Right? They're still there, and they still have to like hear and be present. Like, right? I think there's this sense of people have adopted cues online that they now, and because they predominantly spend so much time in these spaces, and they're of course they're isolated. You're right. The way you interact with somebody online is entirely different than reality.
Should be.
There's just it's a computational, like if you want to look at it from a computer science thing, it's a computational problem. There's no way to, even like if we had VR, like there's no way to compute with our current technology a basic interaction with a single person at a grocery store.
Yep.
Right.
I would say there is, but it is a way that would lead to that would be indicative of the entire collapse of civilization. Like, it wouldn't be the grocery store. It would be you meet each other while raiding what's left of the grocery store, after everything has fallen apart. Like, you can map it onto something, but that something is horrifying.
Right. I would imagine in those environments that there is a sense of disparate on like the whatever you do online to anybody is never going to foment an instantaneous threat on your life.
Okay.
Right. So
Yep.
I think you are correct in the sense of the front half of that reality. I think the back half, though, is it's still you're in an environment where your life, the entropy is so high.
Yep.
Right. That I think that's it. It's like that's one symptom, is that people want, as much as we're inundated with options now, there's also a thing going on where, because of all these social cues and physical space have been lost or deprecated, of course they've lost all of the instinct to queue up and respond to those things.
Yep.
And so and now we're breeding a generation of people almost natively to those lost instincts.
Yep.
And I'm just thinking that it's as simple as people go to rage because they cannot just make someone disappear in physical space the way they can on the internet.
Yep.
Right. And so like the very presence of a person that they don't agree with is it's like a Jean Valjean Inspector Javert moment, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
Where he forgives Javert, and Javert just, his whole worldview is destroyed.
Yep.
Like he lets Javert walk away. I feel like there's Javert moments with people, like their whole worldview is just it comes like is shook by the non-interoperability of how they get to control their cyber world with the real world.
Yep.
And I think it's that simple. It's like in internet space, I can find almost immediately anyone who agrees with any crazy thing I have to think or say. And I can seemingly find anyone who will disagree with me on almost anything. I'm actually beginning to think that social media spaces act like an organism. And in a sense, they have been built where I don't care about the intent. I care about the application. They work day to day. Like, you get online and you say a thing, and and Twitter feels like you're an invading bacteria. And so your presence as blue check this or whatever invites, it's like the Batman Joker thing. Your presence invites disagreeable,
Challenge.
whether it's honest or legitimate or not. But it's like, you know, you post a thing, water is wet, and immediately someone's going to be like, not in space, it's not. Like, it's just, right? It's just an immediate, like, attack on the stability of your words.
And
it's incentivized to compile on that.
Yeah. That last part especially. So do you think it's rage that they can't make the person disappear, or do you think it's rage because of the pre-existing heuristics they've developed? Like, I did this video a while back that I reference all the time about basically it was about the intractable nature of a lot of our problems, and I talk about the heuristics that I think that we use for people we disagree with, and how, I said, so for example, you see someone knock at your door and they're wearing, they're super young and they have someone with them and they're both wearing a white button up and a tie that's not tied very well. And they have little name tags and they're carrying a book, and you're like, oh, this is some door-to-door missionary folk or something like that. Like, you have already preemptively decided how much credibility you have given them, how much you're going to listen to them, if you're even going to answer the door. Like, you've calibrated your response completely independently from any word that's ever come out of that person's mouth, because you've developed a heuristic for, this is one of those people. Rogan talks about this with people with like a Donald Trump hat. People say, oh, that's one of those MAGA guys. And so you calibrate with that. And so I would say, like, I'm wondering if the people online have developed heuristics through this super inflamed rhetoric, that where the way that we so carelessly use the worst words and the worst descriptors for people have made it to where I'm wondering if it's not just that they can't get them to go away, but they have that part of that heuristic process is, this person's an evil existential threat
Right.
to
Yeah.
everything. And so, like, it's not just that I want you to go away, but it's because of what you are. It's not even necessarily that you disagree with me. You're a dog person, I'm a cat person or something.
Sure.
But it's, I have categorized you preemptively, independent of anything you've said, independent of anything about you as a person. To me, you just represent this thing that I spend all day agreeing with my friends and resharing low res memes and whatever, and using, and just flippantly using this language to where it's so ingrained in me to hate you that I have to hate you, that I might not even know why I hate you. A little bit like that, Christoph Waltz monologue at the beginning of Inglorious Bastards, where he talks about if you see a rat, it disgusts you, but you don't know. It could be like, you don't know. It just elicits this response in you, to where people have spent this time online. That's where I'm saying Twitter is terraforming reality, like, because what people have cultivated within themselves online through the flippant use of language, through all of these things I just mentioned, it's that they're primed to hate, and it's very authentic. I think it's an authentic hatred, because it has to be, because they've dug out those neural pathways, and it's just become second nature. And so they're just encountering the physical reality of something that they have spent, probably at that point in time, dozens, if not hundreds of hours of ingraining a very deep-seated hatred and contempt for. That the response is actually quite natural, given what has taken place prior to it.
Yeah, I think, when I get into the discussions of this granularity, I like to bring out my amp stack, if you will, my proverbial music metaphor of do you play guitar or
I think I've
anything
told
like
this
that?
story about playing guitar. Long story short, I got a guitar when I was in middle school, and I got a DVD to teach me how to play, and I spent
Okay.
weeks trying to figure that DVD out. And it turned out my dad had bought disc 3 of a 5-part instructional thing. So the reason I didn't understand it is because I had the 3rd disc and he's saying all this stuff. And he's like, I'm like, dude, I just needed to start with like Smoke on the Water, you know, or like some Blink-182, like Adam's song.
Sure.
And anyway, so I'm familiar a little bit with music generally, but no, I never moved past that.
Okay. Well, I mean, like, just a couple things. Like, I'll usually use an amp as a metaphor in the sense of you have an amp, you use it to amplify the sound of your guitar. And there's gain, there's noise, there might be like sub adjusters for that. I'm talking about basic amps, nothing crazy.
Yep.
You know, your main volume, you might have a secondary volume. But my point is that there are degrees of freedom with that instrument that negotiates the sound, but it doesn't negotiate the volume. And I think a lot of people, they negotiate things primarily, if not at all, just on volume. And it's like,
you say in what you just said, everything outside of the volume is nuance. So is
it can
roughly analogized as nuance, and so what you're describing is the removal of that and just using volume.
Right. Eric, I think, would reference, we're making a lot of assumptions about things that have traditionally been known as truths. We are mistaking them for tastes and vice versa.
Yeah.
So in this case, a truth would be the on-off switch or the volume. Tastes are everything else, including a distortion pedal, right? All of that. And I think we flipped them in a large extent. The other one I would, and this is relevant, the other one I'd make a point is I have this thing called a Rolly keyboard, which is unique to any keyboard since, in the sense that it has each key, you press it, right? It produces a sound because it's, if it's physical, it's interacting with a hammer. If it's, you know, electronic, it's interacting with a board. But Rolly's unique because each key has 4 additional degrees of freedom on it. Like, you can slide your finger up the key and it makes a sound unique to tapping it. Slide down, it produces a different sound. You can like twist your finger to the left of it, it produces a different sound, and to the right, and produces a different sound. And then you can sustain the sound by like shaking your finger, vibrating your finger. Like, so there's dials within dials now just on a key. And so I think like, we're seeing a lot of that now, and people are mistaking it with the power button or the volume switch. And
give an example of what do you mean, if you were to take like a real world.
So when you said like, when, you know, this rage is manifested with someone in a grocery store in regards to, it's like, they've created all of this they're running all this other software in the background, that just initiates to shortcut to seeing this person as no longer a person. Like, you know, they're in a video game, they're the NPC that I need to take out or whatever. And it's a dehumanizing mechanism, right? So it's like,
it's a cultivated dehumanizing mechanism.
Correct.
They have curated this in their reality, and they've cultivated the ability to do it.
Right. So in the event that I can't just swipe left and make them disappear, I initiate my dehumanize my enemy. You know, I have my friend foe script, and I immediately go to my foe script because it's easy, it's quick. It's like, I don't have to think about any of these checksums. I can just go to, well, they said these two things align with what it takes for me to dehumanize a person.
Yep.
And I go to it. Right. Yeah. And then obviously the more you do that, whatever you want to call, the more adept you become at doing that. And I think people
And
are
the more
becoming
natural it becomes for you.
I think people are becoming there are ways now that are this is just it, the money being there, there's not merit, there's motivation, there's monetary motivation to engage in things that train you to better dehumanize people.
Is it actual monetary
Whereas,
or is it social capital? Because I think that for the
no,
average person, it's
well,
just social capital.
yeah, but I mean, obviously, there's there's a perception, right? It's like the newspapers. If it bleeds, it leads. The modern version of that is if everyone's a publisher and everyone's publishing negative stuff, but whatever it is they're focusing on, there's a perception that that's going to lead to some monetary gain. Like we talk about an attention economy now.
Yep.
Right. From a day-to-day basis, what is CNN producing that is contrary? If I were to make the point of like CNN is a reputation destruction mechanism, what are they doing on a day-to-day basis to disprove that statement? Right. And they only exist because there's some monetary incentive in some channel or another to do what it is they do.
Reputation, well, I would take a little bit of this might be a distinction without a difference, or at least another part of the elephant that I'm describing. But I think CNN exists as an establishment reinforcer for the left-wing establishment. And part of the way that it does that is to destroy the reputations of people who are perceived as threats to the establishment, or to just make examples out of people who, in order to, dissuade any future actual potential threats to the establishment. Yeah. Now, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, you finish your thought.
What I was about to say is not attached to that thought, but it was building on something you had just said. So go ahead.
Well, I was just, CNN is almost a placeholder. In spite of it, it is pertinent to know exactly what CNN does do and whatnot. I look at, I pull in and out of perspectives variantly. And so like the sort of 30,000 foot view is, if CNN were a newspaper 300 years ago, it would be doing more or less the same thing it's doing now. Only because I see CNN as a organization that cannot exist at worst, just not completely lying about their preferences just to stay alive.
Yep.
Or at best, like they're just lying to stay alive. Because I look back to like newspapers that started in the 1600s, and a lot of them built on pamphlets, which existed, but most pamphlets were about political things or advertising pieces, like advertising in the sense of like events, shows, plays, because that's what pamphlets did, or they were like political missives, like pushed out by the monarchy or whatever. So they were inspired by pamphlets, but most of the time they were advertising on like going back to witches, like witch trials, witch hunts, some sort of collateralizing of the Catholic Church in regards to penance and that sort of thing. And yeah, so CNN as a placeholder, as a standard for this long sort of held way these types of distributions work, there was space between, like someone would, if they could read and got access to this stuff, they would read it and be like, wow, that, our neighbors were really witches. How about that? I never would
Yeah,
have
who'd have
thought.
thought?
Right.
Yeah.
But because of the expense and because of all these other factors, like they would only see one of those like once every few years, right? Now you're seeing witch pamphlet. You cannot read the amount of witch pamphlets produced about the specific witches you focus on in a lifetime that's being produced in a day.
Yep. And
Right?
it's
So
the same amount of rigor went into the ones you're describing with the same lack of repercussion for dishonesty 400 years ago as today, with an
or
audience
yeah,
of, however many millions.
well, remarkably enough, they never took issue with the possibility that, hey, let's just report that we arrested all these people, and then after days of severe torture, they confessed. And it's never going to dawn on the average person that maybe the torture. Hey, if I was sitting in a chamber, not being fed, allowed to use the bathroom or get water,
I'd probably say whatever you wanted me to say.
yeah. Oh, and I'm on a rack, and you're pulling my fingernails out, and you're stabbing me with a hot poker. Yeah, I'm whatever you want me to be.
Yep. Yep.
Right.
So, sorry, go on.
No, that's where I wanted to end that thread.
Well, there's another part that kind of ties back to our last conversation that I thought about whenever you were saying that people just whenever you said they run the friend foe program.
Yeah.
And the other part of that is that last time we spoke, I think it was after we stopped recording, I brought up the malware thing and I talked to you about rootkits.
Yeah.
And the I don't know hardly anything about programming and various codes, but what little I do know from what little research I've done is that rootkits appear to be one of the most insidious forms of malware because they appear as a program that is a beneficial, normal running program, but they hijack it. So they start running all types of programs that are harmful, or at least isn't what the CPU thinks it's running. Or it might be running that on top of something else, or it basically redefines what that program is. And my point with a lot of these things is that the way some of this ideology and with the dehumanizing works is that people might think they're running their program for morality or for good. They think that they're executing that program like, oh, this is the place where I need to show that I am good and do the moral thing. And this ideology that causes, or whatever, whether it's one belief system or just the natural thing that they've cultivated through dehumanizing people online has made it to where they think they're executing the program for good or moral, but they're actually doing the opposite. And so it's that much worse because it's not that they're doing something authentic. They're doing the opposite of what they think they're doing, but they authentically believe they're doing the other thing. So in the same way that a rootkit oftentimes can be so well hidden in a computer processor that you have to have one that isn't infected with the rootkit, like an entirely different CPU, to detect it in the other one, because the computer itself can't detect it within itself, that these people become so blind to what they're doing that it's almost impossible for them to use, like, to self-assess basically without some like radical reset of paradigms and axioms that got them there in the first place. Does that make sense? And also, if I butchered any of the programming language, feel free to correct me humbly and gently, of course.
Yeah. No,
But
I would say there's very little there that needs any adjustment, and the adjustment is really taste. Gain. Remember that metaphor?
yep.
All that time ago.
Yep.
So your point is solid, and I would just simply say from my experience in that realm, just in the friends call me up IT department,
Yep.
or friends of colleagues of friends, that's like the home doctor visit.
Yep.
I think it fits very well in the sense that there's been so many times I can't remember where they'd be like, "Oh, tech guy, have him come over here and fix my stuff," and because I don't know what's happening, right? So I go over there, and we all sort of have our basic diagnostics, and they wouldn't get through tier 1 diagnostics. It's like, "Oh, you have no antivirus software at all on your computer. Why would I need that? What? Like, no, I don't. You're right. Like, how long have you had this computer? X. How long have you used the internet? Y. So the entire duration of your computer, a year, 2 years. You have never had antivirus software. I didn't want to pay for it. Like, they'd give me some just excuse. But I feel that applies to then this situation, is that we used to, like, ethics, morality, trial by fire,
Principles.
ritual,
I always relate it
rituals,
right to principles, like
right?
unmovable principles.
These have been the human forms of antivirus,
Yep.
and since we've like canned these as a society, people are walking around being like, "Why would I ever need antivirus software?"
Yep.
Right? And they're just soaking up all the bad ideas because they're the
Yep.
fastest ones to absorb.
Yep.
And so, of course, then they're operating with all this malware in their system. And like you said with the rootkit, like, it goes undetected for years. And then, it's one of those, how did I get here scenarios?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's there's a, I think Chloe Valdry talks a lot about this. I mean, I haven't formally gone through her theory of enchantment, just sort of through the application of.
I'm convinced that she is bipolar, by the way.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe.
Because she
I don't know.
says some of the kindest, nicest things, and other times she says things that I'm like, who's in control of this Twitter account?
Yeah.
It's a darn. Anyway, go on.
Well, I guess that's an appropriate place to finish what I was going to say on the thread of, I don't, in regards to kindness, like, that's what I was going to focus on with Chloe. But I've had a sense for a while that all these things that we say we need to put back into society, kindness, patience, forgiveness, mercy, none of these are going to be able to be expressed verbally. It's only going to be through action. Because the internet is just,
it's only verbal.
It's an editor's dream. Like,
yeah,
right? Anything you stick online has become, through the training and everything else, like social media. It's like you post a video of someone doing a kind thing, and it's like it's just the response is just how to tear that down.
Yep. Yeah. Did you watch the video that I shared it in my locals? This dude who has this YouTube channel where he reviews movies and stuff, called The Critical Drinker, made one called Why Do We Need Heroes?
Why Do We Need Heroes? Yeah. Yep.
Did you watch it?
Yep.
Well, that's what he kind of talks about at the end, is that how the idea of just tearing heroes down as so there's nothing to aspire to. He says these are the thoughts of petty, jealous, small minds, and that's where they should remain. Like, they shouldn't be a thing that's accepted. And he says that once you accept everything, there's nothing to aspire. Like, you don't have to aspire to anything. So there's these people that are just filled with resentment at the idea of there being something that's like glaring. And this back to the Jordan Peterson, the heroes tower over us, judging us. You could be better than you are. And there are some people who, instead of rising to the challenge, would rather just tear down the challenge and remove it. And that once everything's accepted, you don't have to aspire to anything. There's no like next level for you to go to.
Yeah, I mean, for years I've used the Dark Knight quote, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Yep.
And then of course, the phrase I've heard often and have used not as often, but a few times, of no living heroes. And
Tell me about that. What do you mean by no living heroes? Because I wrote
well,
that down, and I wrote that as, do you mean that literally, or is that an ideal? Because I had a
oh
thought
sure,
the other day that I was talking to someone about, we were talking about the disappointment of some contemporary theologians going woke a little bit. And I said one of the benefits of someone like Charles Spurgeon or Jonathan Edwards, or Andrew Murray, or even someone like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, is we don't have to experience their crap. We just have the good stuff recorded. And how
oh sure,
the saying is, don't meet your heroes, not don't have heroes. Because if you meet
yeah,
your heroes, then you experience all the ways in which they are human beings.
right,
But it's still good to have heroes. So what do you mean
yeah.
by no living heroes?
Well, I think it's a matter of I mean, it means it's a superposition of concepts, and it depends on what like you're using it for. So I think in the large scope, uh, the internet has showed society is stranger than we've come to realize, based upon this notion of shared principles and shared ideas. It's just now that everyone has so many channels to say so many things all the time, endlessly, it's deranged even the legitimate weirdness of our different thoughts on the world. And so in a small circle, yeah, you can definitely have a group of people that like have an ideal to look up to, and if that's manifest in a person or persons, that's possible. But as soon as you like pull that out, again, you're going to find enough people that it seemingly are louder and can do it for longer that will scream about the Charles Lindbergh thing, right?
Yep.
um and even going back to you know not the witch trial stuff, but because of a lot of the work I'm reading right now is about England and sort of this. They had a 200 plus year period of the sort of schizophrenia that we're experiencing the last 5 years, where um, being Catholics the only way, being Lutherans okay, and then Lutheranism forked into Protestantism through
Yep.
Calvin, and then Calvinism forked, and like it got to a point where many of those things were tolerable, but then James the First came in and he's like, most of those things are not tolerable. And even in like Henry VIII's lifetime, like he went back and forth many times about what was acceptable as a religious practice, and obviously that affected people much differently because it was a matter of life and death. Like
And didn't they
if
have
you
the
were
Church of
caught,
England?
yeah,
Didn't
well,
Henry
if you're,
VIII do the Church of England?
yeah, he divorced himself not only from his
Yeah.
wives but the Pope.
Yep.
And he basically then set the precedent of, well, any monarch can have their own Bible now.
Yeah.
And they should, because if that's the common, if that's the shared principle that 99.9% of people have, well, then the easiest way to control the people is for the monarch to have their own version of the Bible and to have the church back them on what that meant. So like, for instance, the King James Bible was literally a response to the Great Bible that was published by the Tudor Virgin Queen, which was a response to, I'm sorry, the Bishop's Bible, which was a response to the publication of the Great Bible, which was a response to the publication of the Tyndale and Lutheran Bibles. And so each one of them had a socio-political incentive to, and in the process of that, we got the innovations of like, I think it was in the Geneva Bible. The Geneva Bible was the first, not
The
only
printing press.
Bible, but book to do annotations on the sides. Like that's what inspired, like any book now you see that has annotations in the margins, it started there.
Wasn't the Geneva Bible, or am I thinking of, no, it's a different, I'm thinking of Gutenberg. The first ones that were made on the printing press for the masses. Yeah,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
thinking of the Gutenberg one, not the, wasn't that the Gutenberg Bible?
Yep.
Not the Geneva one?
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
It also was the first Bible to do numbering notation by verse, which has obviously been standard now since then. And it was the first to actually use like legible typography, because prior to that it was that very verbose old English script.
Yep.
But like, so there's been, I mean, a series of like printing innovations that came with that. But my point is like, through all that turbulence, there was this awareness among the people in control to manipulate what they needed to manipulate, to sort of Overton window people's political views because it was tethered to their religious views.
Yeah.
Right. And so in the long run, people became freer, but like within the times that they lived, they were again held hostage to their thinking that was inextricably tied to their faith. And depending on when you come in on the story, right, you get the Guy Fawkes who was like, F these mofos, we're going to put some gunpowder under Parliament, try to blow it up, as one response. And to a great extent, the personal thing about that is that the people, all the men that were directly involved, most of them either had relatives or friends that were killed by the Church of England because of their belief systems. So it's like they had a deep-seated hatred, like born into or raised up into for the king and everything like that. So, I mean, obviously that goes into the Unabomber thing, right? Like you can have these great points, but like, well, and then there was the fork of that, because at the time that was happening, then you had the people in Northern England are like, you know what, we can't do our thing here, so we're going to go to the Netherlands and wait it out, try to get a patent so we can go somewhere and live. Because so they saw it entirely. It's like, oh, we can either just leave town and figure out how to live life the way we want to, or we can blow up Parliament. These are the prevailing options. And obviously those people eventually became many of them, some of them left or moved back home, but the core of those people were the Pilgrims.
Yep.
So they lived in the Netherlands for like a dozen years or whatever, trying to acquire a patent for land. At the time, they didn't necessarily know where that was going to be. They were even thinking South America. It just so happened that they got the patent under some sort of seemingly innocuous expectation that it would be in New England. Like you could get your land patent, but it has to be where we want it to be. So they're like, all right. And so, and even still, they were going to try to get to Virginia, but they were moved off course, and because they didn't know where they were going. But and even after that, the English had to deal with two more kings that were like awful. And depending on when you come in the story, it's like you have one Cromwell who was an advisor to Henry VIII for having helping orchestrate turning Henry from Catholic to Protestant so he could use that as a vehicle to divorce his wife and get away from the Pope. He eventually gets beheaded nonetheless. He has a great-great-grandson, Oliver Cromwell, who is also closely related to the king. But instead of like Oliver knowing he's working for a tyrant and just dealing with it and being like living under the fear, Oliver's like, you know what? We're gonna do this differently. We're gonna hunt the king down and kill him. Like, and when I get to Living Heroes thing, he's the exception because he actually died of like disease as a hero for England, because there's a they had Charles the First executed. For 12 years, England was a republic, a commonwealth, and then James II comes out of exile, reinstates himself as king, but at that point Cromwell's dead. His supporters dig up his body and perform an execution of his corpse because he was a villain. Like, it's just,
Wow.
and there's just examples of this, like, of this constant, like, you can stay firm in your beliefs, but everything around you is always changing. And if it changes drastically enough, you're that, right? The thing at the grocery store, it's like,
Yeah.
You're now the villain. You're no matter what, you're the villain in someone else's story.
So tell me this then. There's a couple of things there. One of them is you see these pieces written about, tearing down. Well, it's happened with Columbus and, with Franklin and Jefferson, whatever. But there's another thing I want to focus on, which is one of the things you wrote was you said something to the effect of on the open seas, there's no hills to die on.
Yeah.
And one of the things I wrote was I thought, what's wrong with having a hill to die on? Like, aren't some hills worth dying on? And I thought about like, it's as good as any. Like, there's that scene in Stranger Than Fiction when Dustin Hoffman tells Will Ferrell, he says, you're going to die eventually, but no death that you could end up with is going to be as meaningful or poetic as this one. So, you should take the opportunity. And, I was thinking about the idea of, of having hills to die on. I thought about, like, obviously I know this is a stylized version of it, but it's not entirely wrong. At the end of the movie 300, the Battle of Thermopylae, Gerard Butler's character, King Leonidas, he says, the whole world will know that 300 Spartans gave their last dying breath for freedom. He says we're entering into an age of reason out of an age of mysticism.
Yeah.
And that, we're not going to be slaves. We're free men, and we're going to die for freedom. And so, I don't know if that is, and there's a good chance that none of that has anything to do with what you said there. But my thought was, I'm not sure I would want to steer away from having hills to die on, because some of those hills represent something that needs to be defended, and you might die defending it and you might not. But the idea is that you should have, a place that you've staked out, that is meaningful. And if it's under attack, you're willing to defend it. And if you die, then you die.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So I don't know if that's, I might've been, but just engage with that.
Yeah. So again, no, I appreciate the questions as opposed to like assuming the statements, right? Because sometimes I like saying things and not knowing what I mean by them, and, until they're like
Michael Scott. Sometimes I start a statement without knowing who or where or what. It's like an improvised conversation.
Well, I can finish. I mean, I can at least finish the statement before I taper off. But again, I think that statement is particularly, it's a taste. It's a matter of taste. It's not a principle. I know that for me, I've at least not found that hill. And I know where there's a level of peace that comes with not having to find it. Maybe it's a matter of it'll find me, sort of thing. But again, to sort of deflect the question too, because I go back to the historical statement. It was, the Pilgrims didn't see a hill to die on when it came to England, so they left, and then they left again. And they got to America. The idea of founded by people that had no hills yet, right? And then, funny enough, like the majority of the oldest, obviously existing, because there's towns that don't exist yet anymore. Like
Let's
Jamestown's
define.
not.
Hold
really.
on. All right, let's define our terms. So
Yeah.
Because I hear what you're saying as the reason they left is because they absolutely felt like they had a hill to die on. So I'm talking about ideas and I'm not talking about a physical place. And the other thing that is
right.
that
I mean,
want
you mentioned the 300 thing. Yeah.
Right. No, I know. I mean, they died in a physical place for ideas. Right. So, and the other thing that maybe this will help elucidate is I think that you might not necessarily stake out, because I'm not sure I think that that's right in terms of you talking about that for yourself. I'm not sure every principle you stake out as meaningful is one that you preemptively, or at least are like clairvoyant enough to know that you will be challenged to a fight to the death on that. It's just a thing that you have decided is worth defending. And then as the attacks come, you decide how much it means to you to defend it. But it certainly seems to be the case that there are things that you have decided are worth defending. You just haven't been put in the situation where, is this something or at least with some of these things, maybe with other things, but where you've decided this isn't worth it. I'm going to abandon this. But I think we all have that. We don't know if there's, so maybe it's worth it, like this, like teasing it out to the point of having a hill to defend. And then as it comes under fire, you decide if it's something you want to die on or if you're going to retreat and abandon that.
Sure.
But in terms of, I'm thinking about more in terms of ideas,
sure,
than physical places.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think they're to some extent interactive, but I think you caught me trying to express two paths of that statement simultaneously. So what I mean by that is, there's, of course, personally, I do not want to defend the hill that I'm on. Like I want off this hill.
Yeah.
Away from this hill, right? As far as intellectually, yeah, I think we're at the point that hill can't be it can't be ignored anymore. If it's worth defending, it can't be ignored anymore. And that essentially is, a tradition of, because I mentioned the witch trial thing. It's like, I honestly just think that we inherit the urge to be free, and we have many ways personally, interpersonally, to express it. Right? Like, and almost any intellectual pursuit is some form of calling to be free.
And what that freedom looks like varies from person to person, because back to the
right.
North Korea thing, for some people, slavery is freedom.
There are people that want to be free from freedom. And I think that's the inexorable wall that we've slammed into, is that we have to realize that there are many of our neighbors and colleagues that want to be free from freedom.
Yep.
And this has posed a dramatic societal challenge.
Yep.
Right? And I almost call it that. I've almost I think the concept of institutionalization, which has traditionally been associated to like the prison system, a phenomenon of the prison system, like people just want to be in prison, like they can't handle the real world. I think it's exported to the outside world.
Sure.
Like you can see people that yearn to be institutionalized.
Yep.
Like they want to be taken care of. They want the tyranny of choices eliminated. Things that we're seeing locally here is like, we don't have answers for local inflation or all these businesses going under, which is obviously businesses go under, people lose their jobs. There aren't ones to transition into. They don't have rent. So what's the answer? Well, let's put a moratorium on rent.
Yeah. As opposed to just stopping
Or
the
mortgages.
process that's getting rid of their jobs.
Right. So every answer to all of these false problems now is just getting kicked up to things that are just exponentially going to create more problems.
And compound the existing ones. Like they're going to make the existing ones worse.
But the common tenure is that there's no personal responsibility amongst any part of this chain. Like, these politicians can experiment with these bad ideas. They're never going to be held accountable for the outcomes.
Yep.
Businesses that had no right taking PPE loans, they're not going to be held accountable. People that they don't know when they're going to have work one day or the next. Like, there's no recourse. Like, I mean, other than just hide out in your house and wait it out.
Yep.
So these are the types of hills that aren't interesting to even scab my knee on, let alone bleed out on.
What do you mean by these?
But
these
what I just said about where it's if none of if we're all just waiting for the soup lines to start, and then we just do that for X amount of time, things will return back to 2019.
No, that's insane. That's insane. I think that it's very clear that whatever social pathologies we're running into, and pathologies of governance, the return of these swamp monsters. One thing I wrote this thing, I don't know, 3 years ago about the social trends. And one of the things I wrote was that it seemed like a lot of the stuff was basically adhering to our understanding of what Moore's law, like, people take Moore's law, then they forget about the conductors part of it. Or it was a conductors or circuits. Yeah. I think it was maybe conductors. And they basically say, the dumbed down version of Moore's law is technology doubles every year. And social pathologies, the ways in which
doubling every year.
Yeah, I think they have been probably since 2005, 2008, something like that, whenever the iPhone came out. So 2008, I think that all of the stratification and deterioration of the social fabric, there were things that were put in place that were happening slowly, but they hit that point where they were able, the critical mass, and the way in which they were able to be things that were happening in isolated spheres were able to be extrapolated out across a variety of venues and industries and institutions. So they weren't contained anymore to wherever they were previously. And so I think that it's encountered that Moore's law applies to our social pathologies and governance pathologies. Again, go back and look at, Heather McDonald wrote that. She talked about the Ferguson effect, in that book, The War on Cops. I remember that when that book was written, maybe 2014, somewhere around there, give or take a few years. And the point is that the information has been there about how bad these ideas are, but they're only continuing. I did a video last fall about homelessness in San Francisco, I think it was, is either that or Los Angeles, and how they, between like 2017 and 2018, they had increased their budget many multiples for dealing with homelessness. And what they saw instead was an increase in homelessness by I'm going to get the percentages wrong here, but I think it was a greater than 50% increase. And then they were talking about, well, then we just need to increase the budget even more and then do the same things with just do more of it, to where they were spending like $500 million on, help dealing with homelessness. And every year they spend this money to deal with homelessness, and they just see more of it. And the problems it's exponential, to where they went, like, they didn't go from, 2 to 4 to 6 to 8. They went from 0 to 12 people whose jobs are to pick up needles and human feces in the streets of San Francisco.
Right.
0 to 12. And then it's just hiring more and more people, spending more and more of this money, to where I'm sure in some ways it's linear, but at some point it reaches a point of like that critical mass, like you mentioned, where it's obvious that it's compounding upon a compounding upon a compounding problem. And I think that one of those things, to circle back to what you were saying with how they can these leaders can make these same decisions and the bad governance, it's very obvious at this point that whatever principles tethered decisions to consequences, like what we were talking about earlier with the online stuff and how Twitter is terraforming the real world, and the internet, and just maybe we could say media is terraforming the real world, has made it to where these politicians they've become kind of self-aware. They've become aware of the fact that their decisions don't have any consequences. And so they're doing these things, and they're doing more and more and more and more of it. To where I'm not sure that they're, I went into a little bit, I posted a video with that James and I did a conversation, and I want to say 3 weeks now, probably ago, to where I think that I can pretty reliably map out the ways in which that terraforming is going to take place and lead to a very, like, how some technologies, people say, we don't know how we're going to get there, but we think we're going to be able to do this. And other technologies, people say, we have the foundation here. It's just a matter of getting this one thing to work, and then we'll have this. But they can see it, they can see a version of it. There's lots of different conspiratorial things, that people can go, I can't even see what you're talking about. Like, that doesn't map onto reality. But in terms of the migration and breakdown of the American experiment along, urban hive mind versus that which is not urban hive mind, is at this point, I think, not just something that you can imagine, but something that is now inevitable because of that. Because there are people who are going to see the terraforming and go, I don't want to live in this, media terraformed environment. I'm going to go to where it's not. And that's going to be the only solution, because the solution isn't tell people that their politicians are failing them. They know they don't care.
Yeah, I think what you say there is a manifestation of what I was poorly trying to explain about the joining of intellectual and physical hills to not die on, right? I don't want to be in a physical place that's become Twitter.
Yep.
Or Facebook, or, so that's the end of it. There's Dickens is right. It's the best of times, the worst of times, but that's always the case. And so I say that with, I wonder how many people are cheering on Elon Musk just simply because he comes out and tells you what the end game is: to colonize Mars, to get on the moon, interstellar. At that point, he's probably like at the end of his life, like, I now pass the baton on to whoever for interstellar travel, like, continue to distribute Earthlings beyond Earth, right, so to speak. I'm one of them. I mean, there's other reasons, but I'm one of those. Like, what's the end game for Amazon? Just like, we're on planet Amazon. You pay all your bills, you buy all your stuff, you buy all your groceries, you pay your mortgage. You work for Amazon. That's the end game of Amazon. What's the end game for Twitter?
End game for Twitter is to destroy society. But I mean, Amazon. I'll defend Amazon a little bit. Amazon is in some ways similar to Etsy, where you can have a small business and sell your stuff on Amazon. Like there are people who would otherwise not have a means of distributing their. I mean, I'm not saying Amazon is some benevolent, charitable organization. I'm not saying that, but there are people who would, 50 years ago, maybe not be able to find a market for the things that they make and produce, that Amazon provides them an outlet to do that.
Right.
And people sell, used books and used items and stuff,
Yeah.
So like I wouldn't take such an opaque view of Amazon and what Jeff Bezos is doing, or Bezos, or, who knows, who cares? But, I understand the point that you're making. I would just differentiate some of the things that Amazon is doing and function in terms of, like, again, it's not like if you buy something from Amazon, you bought it from Amazon, LLC or whatever. Like there is probably at this point tens of thousands, if not over 100,000 businesses selling their different things with Amazon as a medium for doing it. It's just an extra, like in some of those areas, it's a macro level, like Yellow Pages or White Pages or whatever, or classifieds.
Yeah.
So,
well, I guess that's interesting.
Yeah. I think that it's not like, I'll put it this way. The simplest way to is, I don't think Amazon is the enemy any more than I think Walmart is the enemy, or anything like that. I think that the enemy is anyone who says it has to just be Amazon and Walmart. That's the enemy. You want to empower as many people. Like South Park did an amazing episode about Walmart. This is a long time ago, where the Walmart comes into town and everyone's going there and buying, Randy's wandering in and buying salt and pepper shakers in the middle of the night, and people are buying these DVD for $1, and they find out like that they can get to the heart of Walmart and go and destroy it and find its power. And they go there and it's a mirror, and that just reflects back, that's the townspeople, and they destroy Walmart and they say, we're going to go and support, Ralph's Pharmacy or whatever it is. And then you see this time lapse of this pharmacy get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it's the size of what Walmart was. And then the end of the episode is them all standing out in front of, they just burned down Ralph's Pharmacy. And so like, to my point, they're not the bad guy. I just think anyone who says it just has to be them. Like I need to have the options here, and the things here need to have the ability to compete to the degree that they can compete. That's all. Yeah. Like I don't think Amazon's a bad guy.
I guess that's interesting. Uniquely, because you're not, at least from the people I've spoke with. I don't see Amazon as a retailer. I see Amazon from the purview of AWS, Amazon Web Services, and as much as you can build a store or self-publish on Amazon, they swallow the internet whole. Like there's no negotiating selling your technology third party through AWS.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
They will eat your technology.
Yeah.
They will buy it, or they will run around you and put you out of business. And that's where all their money's made. They don't make any money on the retail side of Amazon. Like all those dots and all those echoes and all that, they're selling that at cost back to the consumer to make all that data.
I'll say it's spyware. Yeah, of course they're going to sell it at cost.
Well, their tablets, all that stuff.
Yeah, screw that. Yeah, no. And someone got us an Echo Dot for Christmas 2 years ago, and I said, I'm not going to use this, right? And they looked at the other. I think it might be my parents. One of them looked at the other one and said, I told you he wouldn't. And I'm like, yeah, no, of course. I would not invite that demon spawn spyware into my home. Get the hell out of here.
Well, I mean, I digress. I mean, probably a better one is really like what's the end game for Google?
Oh yeah, no, that's a bet. Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah.
I mean, can someone make a concise argument to convince me they're just not a proxy for China now? Or at
Baidu,
least,
yeah,
or
they're the Baidu beta.
or at least like, from the here, like someone posted on Dave's page the other day about something to do with this potential story that broke somewhere about having to carry vaccination cards, like government issued vaccination cards or something like that. And my whole thing is that'll
Anyone
never
who
happen.
thinks that's not coming is naive. That's absolutely coming.
But my thing is the government's not going to do it because they're not good at doing anything.
Yep.
They're just going to convince Google or Amazon to manage the tech infrastructure required to do that, because that is a level of efficiency the government will never look at the healthcare nightmare, right? This is just an extension of the healthcare stuff they tried to take over that they failed miserably from a tech distribution perspective, let alone an in real life application. My concern it really isn't with the federal government anymore. It's if there's enough people there that are smart enough to leverage all the things they want to do with tech.
Well, and it's
right?
not even that they have to make it to where they don't have to even try to make Google enforce something. They just have to put I really think it's as simple as take an idea and make sure that everyone who needs to know understands this is the idea of the good guys, right?
Right.
And then that's where there are so many things where people, whether, I don't want to get into this mass voter fraud, anything like that, but people who, say have this binary of it has to be an elaborate conspiracy that held meetings every, the first Thursday of every month in some clandestine location, or nothing, as opposed to various players who just know what part they play, or who kind of self-initiate in certain things. And so what my point about the vaccine thing is that if they just put it out there as this is the good guys idea, then everything else just will naturally take care of itself. The various establishment media outlets will prop that up as the right idea. And because they're in with the tech, Twitter will put fact checks on anything to the contrary. Google will put that up on YouTube.
Yeah, they'll page rank it.
And the same way, and they'll page rank it, and that's right. And so then it will just become true. It'll become like an axiom that has nothing under it, right? It won't be that we did the study or we did this thing. It'll be literally reality that was just fabricated. But then it's backfilled by the policies that get put in place. And so then it's all over the place, and you just have one company and say, okay, no, we're going to do that. Okay, that's good. I've seen it on the news. I saw Chris Cuomo talking about it, or whoever. I heard Terry Gross talking about it on NPR, and she speaks very quietly, so she must be telling me the truth. And then that's it. And then the companies will just do it. And just think about it like this. We talked about last time about how there are these different mayors in different cities, so the mayor of Atlanta or the mayor of St. Louis or Kansas City or Omaha is looking around and going, what's LA doing? What's New York doing? What's Chicago doing? Businesses are doing the same thing, where they're going, well, if this company's they're posting, they're showing how woke or how good and virtuous they are. They have the idea, they've taken it, then we have to show that we have to do the thing as well. So I don't even think that the federal government has to do it. I just think that there has to be some part of the pieces that matter need to go, oh, this is the this is this will help the establishment. This is the right idea. This is the virtuous thing. And then all the other pieces just know what to do with those. Like they have a template now. They spent the last 4 years developing a template. They have a template now. And so everyone knows what to do once they're given the information at this point. Like, I don't think the government needs to do anything.
Yeah. I mean, I've had instinctual thoughts or spidey sense about what I'm about to say for a while, but it's only the last couple of years where I'm like, especially this year, where I'm like, oh, okay. I think, where we've had conversations about how localism has failed and how federalism has failed.
Yep.
Just not in the sense of it's what it looks like on paper, but the application of it. I think
true federalism has never been tried.
There we are. Or it hasn't been tried since 1855.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Yeah.
I think the federal government is obsolete, and the reason I say that is because its primary mechanism now is printing money.
Border. I think the border can't be neglected.
I was going to say military. So in a sense, it's what it does compared to what it's perceived to do is probably the quote unquote big L libertarians best. Like, okay, I mean they do defense, but the cancel out mechanism there is their printing of money, right? So but what I mean by that is, how can you have House of Representatives and senators all nodding their head being like, defund the police is a good idea, like equals law enforcement? What's the point of passing a law if you have nothing to enforce it with?
Yep.
Right? Like, again, interoperable things. So this is all theater, as it has been, but you're presenting, you're just cheerleaders for ideas at this, like what we're seeing. You're just cheerleaders for ideas.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Yep.
But
you're caricatures of those ideas. Very few of them are authentically presenting the ideas they're cheerleading for, right? Like they're presenting a caricatured, like the most intensified version of that idea. Like there's no nuance to whatever it is they're cheerleading, even if it's rooted in something accurate.
And this is where I think federalism as a piece of software has worked as effectively as it ever has. I think the problem is that it's doing it for all the wrong reasons, in the sense that people didn't see this coming. So for all the anarchists and libertarians that are like the federal and anti-federalists 200 years ago, are like, the federal government is pointless, this is why. It's essentially living and breathing that, because they can have all these sessions and all these talks, but you've gotten to the point where it's like you're letting states just inoculate themselves from law and order.
Yep.
Which is complete at the end of it is completely disrupting the monetary system. And your response then is just print more.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Print more, distribute it to our friends who are going to hoard it and reinvest it, put it back into the stock market, do whatever.
It's an establishment preservation system more than it is like doing the thing that we think it's supposed to do, or that we are told it does system.
Yeah. And then these governors unilaterally do whatever they do, also screaming defund law enforcement.
Yeah.
But I get to a point where I'm like, when people are like, mean poopy face Governor X is doing whatever, I'm like, don't abide by it. Now what?
Yeah.
Who's going to arrest you? They're all telling you cops are irrelevant. Right? If you're going to take from the perspective of taking them at their word, like steal, like we're gonna reductio ad absurdum your argument. You
Yep.
can't run the software that we're going to eliminate virus protection software from your computer and then go onto the dark web.
Yep.
Free for all. And my thing is like, why are you listening to these people that are changing the rules by fiat every day?
Yep.
What are you afraid of?
What you just said, I think, is actually the end game for the United States. I have decided, but no, I think that what I've landed on, as my final conclusion for, I have so many people asking me Civil War questions now all the time, like all the time. And I tell them that I think it's going to come down to the question of the first Civil War. I remember I heard a historian phrase it in what I think is probably the best and simplest way to put it. Because people like to say the Civil War is about slavery. No, it wasn't about, like, they try to make it about one thing. Yeah. And this historian said, you're asking the wrong question. It's actually two questions. The first question is, why did the South secede? That was absolutely about slavery. Like, yeah, duh.
Sure.
Yep. Absolutely about slavery. He said the other question is, why didn't the North let them? And in other words, why did they stop them and then have the Civil War? Like, in other words, if the North didn't say no to that, then there is no Civil War. Then it's just, okay, bye. And the end. Yeah. And so I think a lot of it's I think I also said this in that conversation with James. I said, I think a lot of it's going to boil down to, there are going to be these Hivemind cities are going to be passing legislation, and the places that are not Hivemind city they're going to say, no, we're not going to do that. Make me. And and the question will be, will they do something about it?
Eventually there's going to be a call my bluff event.
Yeah. Yeah.
That'll light the fuse.
And we're seeing trial runs for this, right? And you're seeing places like sheriff. Tiny ones. You're seeing sheriff. I said that Thanksgiving was a trial run for Christmas, and Christmas will be a trial run for 2021.
Right.
In terms of these.
Well, 2020 is a trial run for the rest of our society.
Right.
Here on out. Right.
Totally.
If we're going down the Great Reset road.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, like, I think that that you're seeing these local law enforcement that are just coming out and saying, we're not going to do this, so do something about it. And I think that as long as you have that to that degree with those certain things in those places, and you have a citizenry that knows how to not push their boundaries like that. So in other words, that's kind of the ball's in your court citizens. Like law enforcement is saying the ball's in your court, whatever state government, if you want to try and send, sheriffs or county sheriffs or state highway patrol, and they are going to do it, then that's fine, because they can do that. Sure. But, and then it's also the citizens. It's like, okay, now, and, with this specific example, if they go and throw block parties and they're all out there, spitting in each other's mouths, then the law enforcement is like, okay, wait a second. Like the whole, we're not enforcing this is based on the assumption that you're going to behave normally. And so, there's a fine line there for sure. But my point is that, whenever you said, take them at their word and say, no, I'm not going to do that. I think that that's going to be the end game for us, is these hive minds saying yes and everywhere else going no. And I think that the call my bluff thing is going to boil down to, eventually you're going to get enough people in one place go, why the hell are we paying these people taxes? They're just passing these laws that we aren't going to follow. They don't do anything.
Right.
And they're destroying everything. Yeah.
They're destroying they're destroying the tax system. Well, the purpose of paying taxes is because you're just printing money. Why am I paying taxes?
Yeah. Yeah. Print more
simultaneously ruining the supply.
Yep. Yep.
Right. So it's like, so I mean, you're going to get enough people that run through their brains. Okay, you're forcing me to stay home, not pay so I can generate income to pay my bills, which is creating an asymmetrical tension because all the people that I owe money to still have the right to collect and penalize me. If I do, you're saying that there's these penalties. So no matter, like, you're putting me in a corner where no matter what, I'm suffering penalties. I suffer penalties for not paying. I suffer penalties for paying or
For
trying to
actions,
pay.
yeah, I'm suffering penalties for something I had nothing to do with.
Correct. On top of like these social idiotic things of like, I'm racist because I'm white. Like, so there's this instantiation of all these bad internet penalties being imposed on people.
Yep.
Like, on top of, if you have people running that stuff on top of, okay, well, the money the government just needs, they're just making more of. So why am I creating all this anxiety in my life, trying to invent an impossible way to make money so I can pay 30 to 50% of that in taxes, when you're just ruining it through inflation and all this bad economic policy? Like, at some point, all these bad ideas that media, left or right, have divided and siloed, people are going to put them all together.
Yep.
And realize, I will not comply.
Yep. I'm done with this. They're going to realize that I'm going to tell you, I think you're probably one of the few people that's going to appreciate this stupid anecdote that I'm about to give. It's so stupid. And it's two different examples of a thing that I'm trying to describe, and I don't know how to articulate it. But one of them is that I not that long ago saw a person, and I was having a conversation with them about something, and I watched them spill a drink on some carpet. And I pointed out that they had spilled the drink on the carpet. And they took they went and found a tissue, and they took it and went like this and like generated all these like little paper balls on the carpet. And and just left like all this fabric all over this paper all over the carpet. And then they just left it. And I'm like, have you ever cleaned up a mess in your life? Like, do you not, what the hell are you doing? Yeah. And I'm like, for some reason I took that. I'm like, I don't need to know anything else about that person because I know that they're my age and they just told me that they've never cleaned up a mess from carpet before, or they've never had to actually do it right. Like they just leave messes. And there was other parts of the conversation where it was obvious that this person didn't know what they're talking about. But so there's that. And I watched Ben Shapiro, who I swear I like Ben for a lot of things, but I watched him prepare a turkey.
Okay.
So there's a Thanksgiving video of him preparing a turkey.
I thought you were like on a private Zoom call watching the cooking show. Okay. No.
And there were so many, I think that the comment I put in YouTube was, this is the most glaring example of the difference between people who know how to do things because they do them on their own and people who don't know how to do things because they don't do them on their own. I've seen in recent memory. Like he kept calling it a chicken. He couldn't identify the cutting board. They gave him a knife that was a straight edge knife to cut these herbs. And he starts at the stem. He's cutting it on the plate. And he's like, why would you give me this? Why don't you give me a serrated knife? You don't cut anything except for with a serrated knife. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Have you had to do? And there were all these different parts where it was just clear that he didn't know anything about any of these things.
Yeah.
And what you just said about where people were going to put this together and go, why the hell am I listening to these people? That person who had never cleaned up a mess. And I'm like, why would I ever listen to you? You don't even know one of the most basic things of all time, which is if you spill something on carpet, you blot it.
Yeah.
And then you make sure that you get it all. And you don't just leave paper particulate. Like as an adult, you don't do that.
Yeah. Right.
And I know that's that's why I said this is a stupid anecdote, but there are some things that where you know everything you need to know about. Like you can extrapolate. You do judge books by their cover. That's why they have a cover. There are certain things you know what you need to know about that person. Like if you told me right now, I believe the Earth is hollow and there's lizard people and we actually have an ice dome around the planet, I would be like, okay, good, cool. Like I wouldn't want to know anything else. I'd be like, all right, that's it. Like good. Everything else is tainted by that.
Sure.
And watching that Ben Shapiro thing, I'm like, and I made this point back during the pandemic stuff, and he was saying things that did not map onto my reality. And I'm like, why are conservative people, because I assume that's who watches Ben Shapiro, in maybe the middle of Kansas or Oklahoma or something, taking their cues from him on how they should feel about coronavirus? He lives in Los Angeles.
Right.
Like he doesn't know that if any chef worth their salt uses a very sharp but long straight knife, like why would I only cut herbs with a serrated knife? Like what the hell? No, you don't. Like again, I know that's a stupid small example, but he's almost 40 years old and he should know that. That's my point, is that to the thing that you had mentioned in one of in our last conversation about like people should have calluses on their hands. Like you should trust people that have calluses on their hands.
Something, cuts, scars.
Something that tells you they interact with their own reality. They're responsible for their life, in some way. Okay. And I'm not crapping on Ben because someone probably cooks most of his food. Like that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that does tell, like, I'm not saying it tells you everything, but it does tell you something.
Sure.
Same way with the person cleaning up the mess. And so, like, I think that you expand out that, again, that stupid, maybe even petty, I don't know, anecdote that I just gave. And it's the point is that you blow that up and eventually people will realize that they're taking their cues from elites who have literally nothing, increasingly zero in common with them. And not just with them as a person, but with their circumstances, with their ideals, with their principles, with their ideology, all these other things. And they're like you said, they're going to go, no, what? No, I'm done. I'm not listening to you.
I'm as far away from being a person that exclaims, we need to have a law, one of those people.
Yeah.
In the event of like some of these recent exposures of governors or mayors or whoever doing as they say, not as they do.
Yeah. Principles for thee, but not for me.
I would at least elect to suggest instantiating a skin in the game law.
Yep.
Which is, if you're a public official, outside of your bedroom and the bathroom, there's a camera everywhere in your house, especially if it's a house being paid by the taxpayers. And every time you enact a law, a statute, or a demand, an order, whatever other synonym you can muster up to tell people what to do, decree, oath, whatever. In the event that anyone involved in producing these rules upon the Commonwealth, as soon as it's violated once, it nullifies the law.
Yeah.
Right. So like it's basically just it's taking the literal context of the sword of Damocles and putting it over the officials, not only putting it over them, but knowing that we all know that it's over them.
Yep.
And that it's a thread, right? The other one is I want to see all coastal mayors, government officials, congressmen.
Shot?
What's that?
Nothing.
Yes. No. I want to see them in the middle of the country on a farm for a month.
That's the worst reality show.
Or the best. It would be the best for me.
Yeah.
It'd be amazing. I'd love it. I would love it. Like I want to see them on a farm and like doing on different farms, various farms, hog farm, cattle farm, and it can be just to vary it out a little bit. Like some of them might just wake up and it's like you have to do garbage detail, plumbing, You have to sit in a wood shop and handle, like, we're going to teach you how to use a soldering iron or a saline torch. Like, you're going to get some scars on that 60-year-old wrinkle-free body of yours.
Yep.
Like that, has been preserved in Ivy League schools for your entire adult life.
Yep.
Like, you have to have some exposure in real life of how the world works.
In real life to real life.
To real life, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I had a moment on Twitter yesterday that I think you'd appreciate where, I found that one of the fastest ways to have a tweet that has a bunch of likes is just to, if you happen to think of something snarky that CNN just tweeted, then just reply.
Yeah.
And one of the, I have two anecdotes I'll give you. One of them was, it was a story. It was like vegans are more likely to have like lower bone density and some other like health thing than other people. And my reply was, they also have a significantly higher risk of ruining family or meals and annoying the shit out of normal people in conversations. And I, of course, I had a handful of very angry vegans reply to me, but one of them was something that was along the lines that I think you'll appreciate. Was they replied with some, they were very proud of this, vegan meme or whatever, but it said, if we can't tell kids what happens to farm animals, maybe what we're doing to farm animals is wrong. And I said something to the effect of, outside of the fact that clearly is only true in a place where farms don't exist, that's only meaningful to you in a place where farms don't exist, you should probably look into the following organizations, 4-H and FFA. And they were like, well, those are just propaganda. They brainwash children. I'm like, okay, so if you don't tell a kid, it's because it's bad. And if you do tell a kid and the kid decides they're okay with it, then it's also bad. But my point is that type of meme is only meaningful to someone who thinks that it makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, in other words, they have I'm increasingly becoming aware, like I'm being red pilled within a red pill of the fact that there is a lens that is being applied and in some ways being forced on people, and some are accepting it and some aren't. That is the lens of these, coastal metropolitan areas. And like that lens of, if we don't tell kids what happens on a farm, then maybe what we're doing is wrong, only makes sense if you live in a place that you don't have to engage with the reality that farms exist and that kids live near farms, and that there are some places called farming communities. And there's probably a lot of kids that know what goes on farms. And so, but you see what I'm saying? Like how tunnel visioned that perspective is. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? Like that doesn't, that's something that they circulate to each other in those areas. And they're like, that, you know what? That's right. We don't tell kids what happens on farms. It must be bad. I can't, like, we just dunked on all of those meat eaters. And it's like, the middle of the country is almost completely farms. Have you been to any state? Like I listened to it, Douglas Murray, who I love to death, did that interview with Dave recently.
He didn't go to a single state.
Yeah.
Outside of the coast. Yep.
No, well, he went to Atlanta. But that was it.
It's a coastal state.
Right. He's talked about how he traveled all over the country. I was in California, Oregon, Washington, Florida, New York, and Washington, D.C., and then also in Atlanta.
Didn't even go to Texas to see Joe Rogan.
I'm like, what are you talking about? You traveled around the country and you have a good sense for this. And I'm just like,
what? Traveled around.
That's right.
Perfect language.
That is a very good observation.
Not through the country.
Yeah, I did travel around the circumference, the perimeter of the country. And so, like that was the circumference isn't right. Yeah. Anyway, but that's my point, is that lens is forced onto people, and there are some that are aware of it and there are some that aren't.
Yeah.
Basically. Does that make sense?
I'm going to formally formally renegotiate the terms of the borders of America. And I'm going to, it's the first name that comes off the top of my head. I'm going to rename it APROC. So America is from the Rocky Mountains to the Appalachians. And the two things jutting out on the sides of them are something else.
I wish that it was, so you're not wrong, but unfortunately, remember that example I gave you about the shimmer from that movie Annihilation?
Right.
That's the shimmer. The shimmer has grown and now has its own little pockets where you live as part of the shimmer.
Oh yeah.
Yep. St. Louis, Atlanta, Austin, Omaha, Kansas City. Yep. That's right. Denver, that's part of the shimmer. And that is increasingly happening. And that's where, like, I think APROC is funny and might be apropos, but the way I categorize it is that which is these metropolitan areas and that which is not. It's the Metropolitan Hivemind, and everything that isn't that is what the difference is. We're almost at 3 hours. So the amount of people that are going to hear the anecdote I'm about to say are minimal. So hopefully the few that are left will understand what I mean.
What? They don't really truly love long form podcasting.
That's true. Most people don't. I need to start putting timestamps on things. I think it'll help. But anyway, before we left for Thanksgiving, I wanted to, it was a Saturday, and I told my wife, I'm like, go ahead and sleep in. I'll get up with our daughter and everything. And so I did. And I said, well, wouldn't it be nice if we went and got our breakfast and all this other stuff? So the town that I live in did institute, it's like a mask mandate, but it's like guidelines of that if you're in a public building or like a business, then you're required to wear a mask. Now, I don't know what enforcement there is for it, and I'll get to that here in a second, but that's pretty much it. And so the first place, there was 3 places I was going to go to. There was a place I wanted to go and get her a breakfast burrito. There's another place that makes these really great homemade cinnamon rolls. And then there's another place that I was going to get her some coffee. So I went to the place to get the breakfast burrito, and they make these big, it's called the Daylight Donuts, and they make these delicious big honking breakfast burritos. They'll fill them with bacon if you get the bacon one, and sausage, they'll fill with sausage. So good. So I got her one of those. And this other place is like this kind of, tiny diner, like a down home kind of diner. And whenever I was in Daylight Donuts, everyone's in line and everyone's got their masks on and everything. And I walk into, and so then I go and park, and I go to this other little diner place to get the cinnamon rolls that they make homemade. And I go in the door, and I have these 2 servers on my left, and that are like greeting you, and they have, face coverings and everything, they're working there at the restaurant. And then I look around, and so the entire countertop is full. Everyone's sitting next to each other. And no one's wearing a mask. All the booths are full. No one's literally the only people in there wearing a mask are employees and me. And the place is packed, absolutely packed. Just with regular folks. And I kind of look around and I pull my mask off because my daughter loves pulling on it anyway. And I found where the normal folks hang out. And the server was like, oh yeah, no, you're fine and everything. And I know that there's an uncharitable version of what I just said that's going to sound like I'm some person who is stupid that thinks that masks don't work or will try and, there's people share these things on Facebook that's like, this scientist, obviously masks work. And so like, it's so intuitively true. Like Scott Adams talks about this, like it's so intuitively true that it shouldn't even be a conversation. Like, do you want your surgeon wearing a mask? Like, all these things, it's, so that's not my point. My point is that I stumbled upon a place where it was just all a bunch of people who said, I'm going to take my own risks. And I think that the employees in that place that are serving food were doing the right thing, by the way. I think that if you're serving food and preparing it, then yeah, you should. Because people, you're now putting others at risk, who might not know. But in that place, maybe the people wouldn't care, the customers wouldn't. But I'm just saying as a general rule. my point is that, it was just being in a place where people were like, yeah, I'm just going to live my life. I'm going to do this. Like, I'm not going to freak out. We're going to come in and eat biscuits and gravy and cinnamon rolls. And that's just how it is. And then we'll go back to work and, whatever happens, happens. Now, again, my other caveat, and this isn't some asterisk, I really mean this. If you're going and hanging out with old people after that, then I think that's probably not good. So I think that, again, whenever you're putting others at risk who are in the high risk category, hopefully those people aren't going and visiting nursing homes afterwards. I don't think that'd be cool. But there was something refreshing about that, is my point. There was something refreshing about that. And so the fact that is something that would be so foreign and so completely beyond the pale in some of these other places, that's what I mean about the difference. Like, that there is a whole business and everyone in there, and there's like, yeah, we're just going to do our thing. And we're probably mostly hanging out with other people who are going to do their thing. So, we're just living our life. I think it's going to be the places like that diner versus the other places that are going to be the ones making all those, what you said, mandates, decrees, rules, guidelines, suggestions, whatever. That's going to be the final breakdown.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the old days, and I mean, earlier this year, going back to, I don't know, quite some time.
Back in the glory days of impeachment.
In the glory days of January, the the diner is now what the brothel has always been.
Yeah.
A place full of people willing to take their own risks.
Yeah. It's a speakeasy. I think we're going to have real deal speakeasies.
Oh yeah.
If we don't already.
In everything. Yeah. In everything. Barbershops, bars, clubs, kitchens, restaurants, speakeasy America. Like,
yep. And we're going to have entire communities of that. And that's my point. And here's the other thing. I brought this up in that conversation with James as well, is that after the Volstead Act was repealed, the breweries that didn't go out of business and that were big enough to convert to something else other than alcohol, and then were able to switch their production back to alcohol, were the ones that succeeded. And that's how we had, 50 years of 3 beer brands in the US before people started microbrewing. And we're going to see that here, where all these businesses get shut down and all these things. And the ones that are big enough, that's where I say Amazon and Walmart aren't the enemy. It's the ones who are making it impossible for anyone else to compete that are the enemy. And so, like, they're going to shut it. They're shutting and destroying all these businesses down. Now, one thing I would point out is that within 10 years, 60% of all small businesses that are started go under within 10 years.
Right.
So this idea that 39%, closed this year, it's like, I just have no way of knowing what percentage of those happened because of COVID, which of course there's a percentage of them that happened just because of that. And what percentage of them were, it's the turkey that met Turkey Day just a little sooner than they realized. I don't know, but they were heading for it anyway. So, I don't know. But my point is that generally, just like we've seen back during Prohibition and afterwards and with the speakeasies, is that there's the ones that are big enough, to survive are going to be the ones that get even bigger. It's that Matthew principle that Jordan Peterson talks about.
Sure.
And so that's that divided, whenever you said we need these, this is actually America, it's from these places. I would say that I would make the distinction between the metropolitan areas, because where you're at, I don't think is America.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
And that's maybe not fair. It's just not the part of America that is really doing as much. Like, I need to figure out how to reconcile the fact that places like Silicon Valley are creating lots of really cool things, and have been, with also the fact that I don't think it represents America. Like, how do we reconcile the fact that in these big cities, there is where a lot of the innovation and stuff is taking place, like now, but it's also the places that are generating the ideas that are destroying everything else. They're going to make those innovations moot. Because I don't want to become for the coasts what the coasts have done for the middle of America, right? Where it's flyover country. And where I look at those areas and go, those are toxic hellscapes of cancerous ideas that, I wouldn't piss on if it was on fire. Like, I don't want to do that, but I need to find a way to, to thread the needle of, they need to stop, and we need to stop talking about them. With also, those are also Americans, and there is some good things happening in some of those places. I don't know what that needle is, but it or how to thread it, but I know that it exists. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, they're two countries right now. So I
They
mean,
are,
I
yeah.
imagine your finely stitched Kansas City hat, not on the back of your wall, not the one you're wearing, was not necessarily made in America. Could have been, but there's a good chance it wasn't.
I don't know.
And yet you have it
I'll
nonetheless.
look later. I don't think it was.
And there's a lot.
Neither was this.
Right. Right. And I mean, in short, that would solve a lot of our economic problems if, like, we just decided as a nation that it'd be a good idea to manufacture the things we consume.
What a novel concept, right?
Right. Yeah. As a country, not as like small groups of disparate people here and there.
Yeah. Aren't you excited to go back to the economic policies that created a lot of this?
No.
America's back, baby. Get your muck boots out.
Might be on her back.
Seriously.
Yes.
Yep.
No, that's not. I'm not interested in yet having our. Let's see here. Let me count the ways. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're about to embark on our 8th consecutive term by a baby boomer. I'm not interested in that.
What?
Yeah, Obama was a boomer.
Yeah, I know.
We've had, so Clinton 2 terms, Bush 2 terms, Obama 2 terms, now Trump, now Biden. That's 40 years of boomer presidents. I'm like, this is like, I'm just like, as a, where my bigotry sits is with the olds. Like,
I'd be careful with that, because I'm not sure it's with the olds as much as it is the olds of a particular bent, right? Like, there was a time, like, when wisdom was the product of age, and I don't think we're completely past that time. I do think that we have lost that with some of these. Like, in other words, because of kind of some things we've talked about with consequences not being, like, the reason why wisdom used to come with age is because they were people who had lived long enough and they had survived their own lives and their own actions and the consequences of their actions and the consequences of everyone around them. And so they just, a lot of experience just boils down to knowing cause effect relationships and being able to explain those cause and effect relationships.
Yep.
And there certainly are people, like, I talk about these aren't baby boomers, but my grandparents, my grandpa had I think 7th grade education or 6th grade, and my grandma had an 8th or 9th grade, and they owned a tractor dealership. They owned a general store, and all this other stuff that they did. And they were very super wise people. And I know people even now who are baby boomers who are still pretty wise and understand that because they had to live their lives. Whereas there are other people who would maybe, no one in particular, but let's say anyone who could spend approximately 50 years in politics and not doing anything, and then be rewarded for it at the end. That's not someone who lives in a world of cause effect relationships, or at least functioning cause effect relationships. So my point is that I do have to steelman a little bit the olds and make a distinction between the olds that have had to live their lives and had to, basically the olds that would be able to sit around a card table playing rummy with olds of a different generation. Like, in other words, the olds that grew up with other olds, and those who were part of that boomer silo that began around that time, where cause and effect and action and consequence started to become divorced from each other. Someone who spends 80 years in, a petri dish of not understanding, like having the most perverse and broken incentive structures ingrained into them, is not someone I trust. But that's not all of them for sure. But to your point, generally, which you can tell me if this is wrong or not, do we need to stop? Do we need to get away from that, whatever that is, whether you want to classify it as boomers or classify it as jackasses and parasites? Yeah, we need to get away from that.
Well, sure. I think there's a role for elders that is wanted and necessary in a society that doesn't have their hands on the nuclear codes.
Sure. Yeah.
And the printing presses. And
there is a skin in the game that's lost if you're super old and you're not going to live long enough to see the consequences of your actions.
Yeah. And with that said, I mean, if we retain a nation, the capital should be moved to the middle of the country.
Yeah.
Get off the coasts, and but I mean, being that I do hail from a generation where the ones that lorded over us were like, we don't know what you do, so we're just going to call you X.
Yep.
And so even from the days of, Kurt Cobain being alive and like giving a middle finger to the proverbial people in charge, it's those same people that are in charge and have been this whole time, and they refuse to let go of power.
Which that's the exact type of person you want in charge, right?
That's exactly, yep. And they've been so preoccupied with their handles on the shifter that they never were around to instill any lessons in the people that now have their hands on reality,
Yep.
which is Google, Facebook, and Twitter. And so the generation that should have at some point figured out what their role was in their age and began distributing wisdom, but because they were vacant of it, they were not prepared or able to distribute that to these young people who quickly acquired power like nothing we've seen in human history.
Yep.
And they don't know also what to do with what they have.
It's not been earned. That's the Jeff Goldblum spiel in Jurassic Park.
Right.
Where he's like, they took he said, the problem with what you have here is that you didn't earn it. You stood on the shoulders of geniuses. You took, all this work, all these other people had to work to earn and you just took the next step. You didn't have to fight for it, you didn't have to earn it, and you just market it and you're selling it. And he ends with that line I love, that whenever John Hammond says, but what our scientists have done here, and Ian Malcolm says, yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, no one stopped to ask if they should. Could and should are two different things. Should is a question that comes from experience and having skin in the game and having some wisdom and earning it, and not just having power handed to you. And that's what's lost right now.
Yeah. So mote it be.
Huh?
Well, I wanted to circle back to the witch thing if this was where we were going to close out. So I just
Let's do it.
A very obscure 500-year-old occult reference.
That's, okay, it's very on brand. So close out with the witch thing then. Do it.
Oh, so like going back to that book, you couldn't pronounce the last Maleficarum. We are at a point of people in charge. Some are very elderly, wrinkled hands on some levers, and then we have some youthful but unscarred, uncalloused hands on levers of others. But seemingly, they're both going in trajectory, convincing people that the proper way to have a society is to indict their neighbors on, well, if you don't believe in witchcraft and you don't openly support witchcraft, you must be a witch.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And we are running those tests on everything now. And it goes back to what happens when, instead of people listening to the clutch my pearls pornography of the day on one subject, when more people start putting all of it together and realizing there's no future in this.
It's true. Well, and how much of that, like, there's a few movies that I think, like, there are some movies like Back to the Future, for example, that's not a good, like, way to look at what you think might be coming down the pike for a civilization. But there's a few movies I think that are. One of them is WALL-E. I think WALL-E is one. But another one is, I think that the future is more WALL-E and less Idiocracy.
Sure.
But the other one is some version, combining the concepts in the movie Surrogates with the ones in Ready Player One. Because what do you do if you don't like freedom? So freedom and liberty are tools that you don't know how to wield to change your circumstances. And you just want to wait it out. Well, you develop coping skills that are just what's the next level of escapism? It's the VR. We're already seeing it, the pornography, all of it. So I think that whenever you said there's no future in that, my thought is, I'm not sure how many people are even thinking about the future. I'm not sure that the future is something, you were talking about earlier about how death is something that we've lost touch with. And I think you're right. I think you're spot on. Another part of this is Greg from the Exiting the Cave Locals left a really insightful comment on the video I made the other day about the election. And he talked about how, the problem is people that want power and how politics just gets a life of its own. And that it's always going to be a race to who abandons all principles first, in the name of power, and how things go from persuasion to coercion to propaganda to propaganda to coercion to force, basically, and how that's just kind of the natural way of things. And I think one of the ways you make that easier is by enabling people, was it Marx who said religion's the opiate of the masses? Well, whenever people abandon that, you just give them a new opiate, and you give them more ways to escape. And so you make the technology free and easy to keep people, if people don't think that the Oculus and the things that you can do with the Oculus now, talk about Moore's law, that the way virtual reality will be, and actually what I think in terms of augmented reality, I thought that Pokemon Go was a pretty genius thing that functioned on a cell phone, and that augmented thing I think is going to be more, but some version of that is going to be the opiate of the masses in probably about a decade or so, which will allow those with unscarred, uncalloused hands to continue to run things with power that they don't understand and didn't necessarily earn, but there's no one there to stop them because everyone's,
jacked in.
Exactly. Yep. So, and then it also solves the witch problem, right? Because you can I think everything has to be taken to its logical conclusion. That's the Ayn Rand thing, right? Take the online echo chambers to their logical conclusion. It's not just that Twitter is terraforming reality. Reality is going to terraform media. And that's what VR is. VR is reality terraforming the virtual space. So now you can engage and pretend to be in the physical world while in reality, while at the same time, the real world,
right. But none of the consequences of the
is
real
going to
world.
conform.
I can have a
Exactly.
simulation of the real world, no consequences. Yeah.
Right. And so it's going to solve that problem as well. And so then you just, what do you got? It's just a bunch of vegetables sitting around. And then
Batteries.
where are those? Yeah, the Matrix. And so, but my point is that where are those people primarily going to be located? In the places where you have the most squalor, where you have the most hopelessness, where you have the most nihilism and apathy. That's those big metropolitan areas. And so
Right.
you're going to have the wealthy, who are going to continue to do their thing. You're going to have a way to keep the other people, sedated, self-sedated. The people are largely asking for this. They're begging for it.
Yep. Right.
And then you're going to have the, the little, I don't know if there's a name for the towns, the little, in Western movies that you come across that are kind of out in the outskirts, the little trading posts and, the places where the things get done. Then you're going to have the people who are like, yeah, I'm not interested. And everyone in those other places are going to be told that that's the witches. One thing, think about someone who grows up, who is, let's say 7 years old in Portland, Oregon right now, and they have the kind of parents that want to remain there. In 10 years, take that kid and have them have a conversation with a kid that grew up in rural Wyoming, just about the nature of reality, and tell me how possible that conversation even is. I don't think it's an even possible conversation.
I don't think it is, because they're not gonna.
There's nothing. There's no place to even start. And so that's where the geography stuff is going to, if it's not already there, it's going to be a product of necessity. It's going to be a thing where people look around and go, yeah, this makes sense. I don't want to talk to those people because they have nothing in common. So,
well, that's sort of the interesting, because it does not wander. It synthesizes. Going back to the free from freedom aspect is, and you said it about the being jacked in. People are asking for it. It's obvious with a lot of pieces of software that's running that there's a psychological undertone, because this is not a new phenomenon with humans, but we're now running the experiments as a society of there's large groups of people that don't want to be understood. And using all this new invented language and it being very liquid, very in flux. You can talk about like the power dynamics and things like that, but it feeds into the like ongoing like psychosis that is occurring underneath of if I remain in a state where nobody understands me, I can continue to feed these psychoses, that keeps me in the place that I'm in because it's all I know or whatever.
And you gain power from it. Things are perverse so that you gain power from being there. So the more understood you are, the less you have to wield against other people for not understanding you.
Yeah. And, not being able to have, like, I don't know, Lindsay talks about attempting to have impossible conversations. I mean, that starts with, okay, we're now interacting with people that, basic tenets of reality. They have that is not true, like, automated response to.
Yep.
Or there's almost like a rejection to it. Like I've one of the nice things about like living every day and like working with my hands and doing stuff, I'm just constantly interacting with reality.
Yep.
And I do stuff online or on a computer, but there's something that pulls me away from that beyond just like basic biology. And that idea of, internet terraforming the world terraforming the internet, as a computational need to further fulfill new digital needs. And there's a chase that constantly goes where the common theme is like, the paradox of the concept of solipsism only works by consensus. Like, because we have to come to a consensus that word means what it means.
Yep.
But the idea of solipsism is that you are your own reality and everything else is a projection and etc. But we're in that state where it's like we're trying, the paradox of trying to make human connections with people when they're simultaneously like building a worldview that makes sure that they cannot connect with other people.
Yep. Yeah.
And I think fundamentally that's where the rift happens. But it's not just like, we had a civil war over, is this commerce? Is this slavery? Is this a human rights thing? Now we're talking about, we don't know, we can't agree on
what is gravity.
What we're looking. Yeah. What is gravity? What is a man? What is a woman? What does it mean for a healthy person to have to be locked down in a society, like a society of healthy people that have to be locked down in fear of the vast minority of people of maybe catching a disease. And this is going Delta. So
yep.
More.
If people don't think that that's going to be the thing, like, again, there are the way that all of this is shaping. I mean, that's what we're talking about, is how this shapes different quadrants of society. And there's going to be what, if people don't think that we're now laying the groundwork for that rift in a big way. I mean, this is some serious, we're pouring a lot of concrete right now for the foundation of people who say, I want to live in a place that does these things, and people who say, I want to live in a place that doesn't.
Yeah, just the idea of people like said out loud, I want to live in a place surrounded by people where I don't understand any of them.
Yeah.
Jonathan Swift actually, I think, talked about this in Gulliver's Travels.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't that
Check
story for. I know Gulliver's Travels. I just don't remember that specific.
Yeah. One of the islands Gulliver travels to, I believe, is an island where he can't understand anyone, and no one really can understand each other.
Lovely. Anyway, okay, so we're at about 3 hours. We're a little over. Sweet. So we can call it there. Is there any? There was something I feel like I wanted to ask you about.
Oh, you wanted to ask me about D&D? I
did want to ask you about D&D. Unfortunately, that isn't the thing I was thinking of, but I still don't remember the thing I was thinking of. So no, it's perfectly helpful, because now I don't have to sit here and go, you can just close us out on how D&D is going to save us.
Well, D&D,
even though everyone's running their own D&D campaigns right now, right? Right now, everyone is a DM instead of letting reality be the DM.
That's called homebrewing, but they still have to. They still are building on a point of shared origin.
Yep.
And also language. But I believe D&D is just a great example of an iterative game, right? So the idea is you can't win it alone. You start alone, you don't win it alone, or you don't succeed alone. You have a small group of people. It's a Pareto improved environment, meaning it's impossible to gain without everyone else gaining.
Yep. It really is a rising tide lifts all boats kind of place. Like, you can't have one person who maxes out all these other things. And then, like, if you have a guy who never shows up and never gets any XP, he's not helpful to the campaign.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's almost the game adjusts in the absence. The game adjusts, but it remains Pareto improved. And I think that is a stark difference to where we are economically now. I would imagine the D&D campaign we're running now is there's large swaths of society that are actively playing a D&D game unbeknownst to them. They're acquiring a lot of experience, maybe less skills, maybe more, but a lot of experience, but they're never leveling up.
Yep.
The DM is, which is unnecessary. The DM doesn't
Yep.
need to level up, but the DM's leveling up.
Yep.
And then you might come to find out 100 hours into the campaign that one of the other players are leveling up because they're sleeping with the DM.
Yep.
But for the most part, it is a zero sum. It's the antithesis of a zero sum game. And it's honestly, it's what a lot of people under the age of 40 are used to because of video games, because they're deterministic. You enter a video game, aside from something being buggy, you enter a video game, you do a thing, it happens every single time.
Yep.
So there's an economic exchange that's occurring abstractly that multiple generations now have become accustomed to through these virtual experiences or whatever. D&D is obviously an analog of video games, and I think that's where we could go. I think that's where, in a lot of ways, we should go. But obviously, the eggs that need to be broken to make an omelet in that scenario are all the incumbents.
Yeah. And by incumbents, you're talking about the incumbent alternatives to something that runs like that and the institutions that support them.
Yeah, I think honestly, historically speaking, one of the greatest sort of I don't want to call it like side commentaries of our era will be the only reason Bitcoin survived is because we don't know its creator.
That's good.
Because in an era where we need to tear down all our heroes,
yeah, you cancel him. Yeah, he would get canceled.
Bitcoin is built by a hero that no one knows its name.
Yep. Yeah, one of the things that, to that point, what's funny is that the first game I really cut my teeth on that was a big game I put a lot of time in was a very grindy game, and I liked it. And me and my friends grinded it pretty hard, and our characters were awesome as a result. And I used to say, I mean, a long time ago, that any game that doesn't have a grind isn't worth playing, because you should have, like, there should be a direct input-output relationship in the game. Now, some games have a grind in that the more you play it, the better you get.
Yeah.
So fair enough. But there are some games that people that are just good at that kind of game can just pick up and be better than someone who played it for, 50 hours.
Right.
And so my point is that I think that I like things that are grindy. Like, I like that. And even like growing up, whenever I was playing video games, you talked about working with your hands. I feel very lucky that I was the kind of kid that played PlayStation and loved PlayStation.
Yep.
And I also would go out and catch frogs in the creek and bring them back to my parents' chagrin, and I'd have these big aquariums with these frogs and salamanders and stuff that I caught. And then I'd wash my hands and go play PlayStation. And so, like, I felt very fortunate of that. But either way, to your point about being iterative, and it, in terms of the Pareto distribution, doesn't, like, it kind of defies the Pareto distribution, right? Like, you said, what do you say, Pareto supportive or Pareto improved?
Pareto improved.
Yeah. Like, I like that, and that's good. I'm not sure that I inherently dislike the Pareto distribution, because
no, it's just reality.
It just is. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're wearing the example or the exception to the rule with your Kansas City garb there. But I mean, if you look at all the professional sports, WNBA, NBA, NHL, MLB, NBA, 20% of the franchises own 80% of the titles in every one of those leagues.
Well, fortunately, we have a quarterback who now owns all of the records already on year 3. Just saying.
I mean, he has a long way to 560 or whatever Brady's at. But I imagine he'll break it in 3 years. So
Boy,
he'll
I
be
sure hope so.
the first quarterback to throw 300 touchdowns in a season.
I could see that happening, to be honest. Anyway, Kevin was telling me, like, what happens if Mahomes gets COVID, and I said, do not speak that blasphemy to me.
Like,
I'm
what do you
okay.
mean?
I'm okay with lockdowns and bubble boy for him just because of the league. Like, nope.
I mean, Trump walked off COVID. What do you think Mahomes is going to do?
I'm not worried about Mahomes being harmed by it. I'm worried about the fact they won't let him play for however long if he gets it. That's
yeah, well, just have him get it now, get it out of the way.
That's what Kevin said. Stop it. I want him to get it in the beginning of March. That's it. Beginning of March. I want to go to the Super Bowl, win, and then he can get COVID.
Go to the Super Bowl and get COVID. Yeah, that'd be...
No, after COVID. After
yeah,
COVID. That'll be he'll get it at the celebration party, and then that way COVID never interacts with our team. That way Travis Kelce never gets it. I'm just saying. Anyway.
Wow.
I'm down for protecting them, and at least for the. I'm okay if they swap fundamental liberty or essential liberty for temporary safety until February.
Wow. I mean, I will say I did notice that Pittsburgh's still undefeated, and they have a pretty lame schedule the rest of the season. So
yeah,
if it is Kansas City, wait, are they in the same conference? No. So is Kansas City going to become New York Giants to New England? Is that? I mean, Pittsburgh would have some heavy competition before getting to the Super Bowl, but
no, we'll be okay. No. I think that we'll coast into the bye week, and then play a team that hopefully we take seriously in week 3, and then we're at the Super Bowl. Or no, I guess we would have 2 games, bye, and then 2 games in Super Bowl, right? Yeah. So.
Yeah, I don't know. Is the playoffs different? Like every other league change their playoff rules?
No. Okay. But Kansas City, because of the teams that we beat, we should get a bye week 1.
Oh, sure. I was just saying, like NBA, NHL, they like expanded the amount of teams that got in to the playoffs this year.
I'm done with that crap. Whatever. Anyway, there's a reason I don't follow any of the other sports. I can barely do football, but I got to have something. So that's why I'm like,
sure.
don't take Pat. Although, we do have Matt Moore, I think, still, and Matt Moore did a good job whenever Pat hurt his knee. So anyway, I like Matt Moore. Do you know that guy's story, Matt Moore?
I don't know.
Matt Moore was a middle of the road generic quarterback for the entirety of his professional career. He retired. I think he was helping Jacksonville with their combine, but he'd taken a job like coaching high school football. And that summer he was helping like Jacksonville, like with their training a little bit. I think it was Jacksonville. But he was going to go coach high school football. And whenever our backup quarterback got hurt at the beginning of the season, a guy named Chad Henne during one of the preseason games, Andy Reid called Matt Moore and said, will you just be our backup this season? Like, please, come back. And so Matt Moore did. And, he's backup quarterback to Pat Mahomes, who hurts his kneecap. His kneecap rolls off of his leg, basically, in that game against Denver. And Matt Moore finished that game out. The next game we played the Packers, and he statistically threw as good or a little better than Aaron Rodgers. The only reason we lost is because one of our running backs had a fumble, and the other team scored on it, and the Packers scored on it. But Matt Moore threw perfect. And then the next game we won, and he carried. And so the guy was going to be just coaching high school football, be wound up with a Super Bowl ring off of it, and and helped us out whenever Mahomes was hurt. My point is that I would be totally okay with Matt Moore being in there if Pat did get COVID. But I just think that's a hell of a story, for that guy to, my guess is he didn't expect that year to go as it did.
Yeah, I mean that's just the only story like that comes to mind is like the whole Kurt Warner was working in a grocery store a bit before LA called him up and said, "Come on down."
Yep.
I mean that's funny. Like I also just heard, didn't like Denver had all their quarterbacks had COVID or something?
Yep.
So
Yep.
like,
Not that their quarterbacks are any good, even though one of them's a former Missouri Tiger. Their starter, Drew Lock, I think is his name. He's a former
oh,
Tiger, but yeah.
so they had to start a wide receiver or something at QB.
Yep. Yep. That's very on brand for Denver lately. You know, anytime I talk to people who are Denver fans now, they try to remind me of how great they used to be, and I'm like, yeah, past is past, present's now, bro. Like, like I had to deal with your crap with Peyton Manning for so long. Like, no. Or not Peyton Manning. Who was there? Well, yeah, wasn't it Peyton?
Well, Elway,
No,
but that
but
was,
the last one they had was Peyton, wasn't it? It was Peyton
oh
Manning.
yeah.
Yeah. For some reason, I thought of Eli Manning. I'm like, no, because
No.
Eli played for that whatever East Coast team. I think he still does actually. Anyway,
Yeah.
so all right. That seems like a good place to end it. An anecdote about Matt Moore, and that if
Yeah.
you know, be the type of person that knocks or that answers the door when fate calls on you, and you're probably not going to be the type of person that sits hunkered down in a city hoping to just wait it out. You know, be a Matt Moore type, not a someone plugged into Wally machine type, right? Isn't that
Correct.
is that the best? That's not bad? That's not bad on the fly, huh?
That is not bad. No.
Okay, all
No.
right.
The ship has sails.
The
Just gotta
what?
use them. I said the
Oh,
ship has sails.
it's true. I like how in your note you said in a sea full of adjectives, you know, or in a world full of adjectives, let us be men of verbs. I like that. So go ahead and tell people where they can find you, the stuff you're doing, just where they can, anyone
Sure.
that's still
Yeah.
watching this after 3.5 hours.
That's right. Well, half speed and it's hour and a half, or double speed. Yeah. Do it on half speed. Yeah. Why not? Idsofideas.com and Ides of Ideas with a 1 at locals.com. Just put in a 1 and it'll pop up because I'm the only thing. Thank you, Tag Management. I don't know. I'm also on Anchor, same name, same number, which would also be Spotify. There's many. I've done. Speaking of which, speaking of Science of Babylon, I did an audio book recording of Science of Babylon.
What?
You can find that on Anchor.fm, Spotify, Apple iTunes.
Of you just reading the book?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. That's super interesting. Cool.
I believe it's a book that needs to be read or listened to, whichever.
Okay. Very
Eaten,
cool.
if you have to.
Digested. Yep. Very cool. All right. Well, as for me, you know, you guys know the drill. Return to reason.locals.com, Twitter at My Mundane Mind, YouTube Return to Reason, Medium, ThinkSpot, all of the places. You know, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all that you know the thing. You know the thing. Anyway, I'm about to get depressed. So I'm going to stop recording there. Thanks everyone for watching.
Thank you.
And, we will check you next time. Peace.